Jason Miller grabbed her by the arm and shoved her hard toward the center of the mat. "Move," he said. "I said move." She stumbled, caught herself. Every student in the room went still. He laughed loud, deliberate, the laugh of a man who had never once been wrong about anything in his own estimation. He spread his arms wide for his audience. 30 students in this room, he announced, and not one of them is as lost as this woman right here. He leaned close to her face. "What are you even doing here, sweetheart? You think this is a gym class?" He had no idea she had kept men alive under enemy fire with her bare hands. If this story moves something inside you, please subscribe to our channel and follow along with me until the very end. Drop a comment below and tell me what city you are watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The morning Rachel Carter walked into Pacific Coast Martial Arts Academy, she almost didn't go inside at all. She sat in her car for 11 minutes in the parking lot engine, running both hands resting on the steering wheel, staring at the front door like it was something she needed to negotiate with before she could face it. The sign above the entrance was simple. Red letters on a white background. A small outline of a fighter in a stance she had never formally studied, but understood in a way that most people inside that building never would. She turned off the engine, then she turned it back on, then she turned it off again. Her therapist, Dr. Patricia Gwynn, had been suggesting something like this for 3 months. Not those exact words. Not that specific place, but the concept. Something physical. Something structured. Something with rules and predictable outcomes, because Rachel's life for the past 14 months had contained almost none of those things. Since leaving the Navy, since walking away from the only world that had made complete sense to her for 11 years, she had been drifting through civilian life the way a person navigates underwater, no light, no air, no clear sense of which direction was up. Rachel, Dr. Gwynn had said during their last session, leaning slightly forward in her chair, "Your body has been in survival mode for so long that it doesn't know how to be in rest mode. You need to give it something to do, something safe, something that reminds it that you're okay now." Rachel had stared at the wall behind the doctor's head for a long moment. Then she said, "Fine, okay." But she hadn't said it like a person who believed it. She said it like a person who was tired of disagreeing. She got out of the car on the 12th minute. She grabbed her canvas bag from the back seat and walked across the parking lot with her eyes down and her shoulders slightly rounded. A posture she had spent months cultivating on purpose, because standing the way her body naturally defaulted to the way 11 years of training and deployment had built her made people uncomfortable. It made them ask questions. It made them look at her like something they couldn't categorize. And Rachel was exhausted by being impossible to categorize. She just wanted to be a regular person taking a regular class. The bell above the door chimed when she pushed it open. The reception area smelled like rubber mats and disinfectant. That particular kind of air that only exists in places where people regularly push themselves past what they thought they could handle. She breathed it in without meaning to, and felt something in her chest loosen slightly, and without fanfare, like a knot that had been pulled 1 degree looser than it had been a moment before. Behind the front desk sat a teenager with a Pacific Coast Martial Arts t-shirt that was a size too large. He looked up from his phone. "You here for the beginner class?" Rachel nodded. "Great. Sign the waiver, fill this out." He slid a clipboard across the counter. "Class starts in about 10 minutes. You can change in the back." She filled out the form. Name, Rachel Carter. Age 34. Emergency contact. She paused there longer than she should have, then wrote her sister Dana's name and her Portland number. Prior martial arts experience, she wrote none, which was technically accurate. She had never enrolled in a formal class, never earned a belt, never competed in a tournament. She left out the hand-to-hand combat training embedded in every phase of her SEAL-attached preparation. She left out the close-quarters drills, the years of operational conditioning. She left out the fact that she had once disarmed a man in a hallway, in a country she still was not permitted to name in any official capacity. She was just Rachel Carter. 34. Beginner. She handed back the clipboard changed into her gray workout clothes and walked through the double doors into the main training area. The room was already alive. About 30 students of various ages moved around the edges of the mat warming up, but most of them were doing it in a way that was designed to be observed. Stretching a little too dramatically, holding poses a beat too long, making sure the people nearby noticed how flexible they were, how dedicated, how serious. Rachel recognized the dynamic immediately. She had seen it in every high-performance environment she had ever entered. The posturing that happens before the real thing starts, the way people establish hierarchy before anyone has actually done anything to earn it. She found an empty corner near the back wall and began stretching quietly, methodically, without any performance at all. That was when she first noticed Jason Miller, who was standing at the front of the room, and it was immediately clear that the front of the room was his natural habitat. He was 23, tall and lean, moving with the practiced fluency of someone who had spent years in this space. He had started training at Pacific Coast at age 12, earned his black belt at 17, won 3 regional tournaments between 18 and 21, and had been teaching the beginner class for the past 2 years. His social media presence documented all of this in considerable detail. His most popular video, around 80,000 views, was titled, "Why Most People Quit Martial Arts and Why I Never Did." He wore his black belt the way some men wear a crown. I was talking to 3 senior students when Rachel settled into her corner. She caught fragments, something about an upcoming competition, something about a technique someone was struggling with, and then laughter, easy and comfortable. The laughter of people who were completely at home. She didn't pay close attention. She was focused on her own body, on the specific tightness in her left shoulder that had been there since an operation 4 years ago that she was not cleared to discuss, on her breathing, on the quiet work of simply being present in a room without mapping every exit. This was something she had been practicing. Dr. Gwynn called it grounding. Rachel called it learning to trust that the walls weren't going to move. At 10 o'clock, Jason clapped his hands twice, and the class assembled on the mat in rough rows. Rachel stood at the back. Several people smiled at her in the tentative way people smile at newcomers, welcoming, but also assessing, trying to figure out where she fit. She smiled back, small and genuine. "Good morning, everyone," Jason said, moving to the front with easy authority. "We've got a few new faces, which is great. For those of you who are new, this class is about fundamentals. We build from the ground up here. No shortcuts, no egos." A pause, and several regulars laughed in a way that suggested this was a familiar joke. "Or at least we leave the egos at the door." He grinned. "Let's warm up." For the first 45 minutes, Rachel simply participated. She followed along. She watched carefully when Jason demonstrated techniques and attempted the movements with the deliberate, attentive focus of someone genuinely learning. She made intentional mistakes, not enough to be obvious about it, but enough to maintain the appearance of a beginner because she genuinely wanted to be one here. She wanted the ordinary experience of being new at something, of not being the person everyone looked to, of just being a body in a room working toward something without the weight of anyone else's survival depending on her getting it right. But her body kept betraying her, not dramatically, not in any way that most people in the room would have noticed, but twice during the warm-up when Jason demonstrated a movement and asked the class to mirror it. Rachel's muscle memory fired a fraction of a second faster than her intention to appear inexperienced. Just by a fraction. Just enough that the woman standing next to her, a woman in her 40s named Linda, who had been coming here about 6 months, glanced over with a slightly puzzled expression. The look you give someone when something about them doesn't quite add up. Rachel slowed down. She added a small hesitation to her movements, a slight self-correction that read as figuring out the technique rather than suppressing an automatic response. Nobody said anything. The class continued. And then came the moment that changed everything. About an hour in, Jason called for a water break and gestured for everyone to gather around him. He had a habit Rachel would learn later of using the middle portion of class for what he called real talk, extended conversations about martial arts, philosophy, about the nature of combat, about what he believed separated genuine fighters from people who just went through the motions. His regular students loved these segments. They were passionate and energetic, and filled with a kind of conviction that was genuinely compelling, even if, as Rachel was about to discover, it was also somewhat uninformed by actual experience. "Let me ask you all something," Jason said, walking slowly in front of the assembled class. "How many of you think you understand what a real fight looks like?" A few hands went up tentative. Most people kept them down. "Good," Jason said. "That's honest, because most people have no idea. They watch movies, they watch YouTube, they think they know what happens when things get real. They don't." He shook his head. "Real combat, and I mean real, not sparring, not competition. Real combat is psychological before it's physical. The person who survives isn't always the person with the best technique. It's the person who can control their mind when everything is going wrong." Several students nodded. Rachel watched him. "Confidence," Jason continued, "is the first weapon. If you walk into a situation looking like you don't belong there, like you're uncertain, like you're hoping nobody calls on you." He stopped walking. He had reached the section of the arc where Rachel was standing. His eyes landed on her and stayed there. "You've already lost." The shift in the room was subtle but immediate. Rachel felt it, the slight reorganization of attention as the people around her understood that Jason's example had just acquired a specific face. "Take our newcomer here," Jason said. Rachel kept her expression neutral. "No offense," he added in the tone of someone about to give a great deal of offense. "But you walked in today looking like—" He tilted his head, performed a brief assessment. "Like you were hoping the class wouldn't go too hard. Like you'd really prefer if nobody called on you." He smiled at the class, inviting them to share the observation. "That's exactly what I'm talking about. That posture, that invisible energy in a real situation that gets you hurt." Two students laughed. Not all of them, but two, and it was enough to make the room feel different. Rachel breathed in slowly through her nose. She knew what this was. She had encountered versions of it before in training and briefings in the particular social ecosystem of high-performance environments, where hierarchies get established through public tests and the people at the top defend their position by making examples. She understood the mechanics of what Jason Miller was doing better than he understood them himself. And she knew that the correct tactical response was to say nothing. But something else was happening beneath that tactical understanding. Something older and quieter and harder to reason with. A feeling she recognized, the specific bone-deep tiredness that comes from having spent years being underestimated and then proving yourself only to be underestimated again in the next room and the next, because the proof never seemed to stick. Because there was always another Jason Miller and another version of this exact moment where someone looked at her and decided she was less than what she was. She breathed out. "I'm just here to exercise," she said. Her voice was level. No edge to it. No invitation to escalate. Just a factual statement offered without apology. Jason heard the levelness and interpreted it as uncertainty. He smiled wider. "Fitness classes are down the street," he said. Several more students laughed more confidently this time. "I say this with all respect, this space is for people who are serious about training, about actual discipline, about understanding what it means to know your body in a high-pressure situation." He was building momentum now. "You can't just walk in off the street and expect to understand what we're doing here, Jason." A woman's voice from the side of the room, one of the senior students, mid-30s, named Amy, who had been coming here 4 years and had learned to recognize when Jason's real talk edged past philosophy into something else. "She's a new student. Maybe we could—" "I'm making a point," Jason said, not looking at Amy. He was still looking at Rachel. "No disrespect. I'm sure she's a perfectly nice person. But there's a difference between being a nice person and understanding real combat. And I think new students need to understand that distinction from day one." He stepped slightly closer to Rachel. Not aggressively, but with the casual ownership of someone who believed the space around him belonged to him by default. "What's your background? Any training?" "Not formally," Rachel said. "Not formally," he repeated, smiling at the class. "Okay, so what do you do professionally?" A pause. 1 beat. 2. "I was in the military," Rachel said. Something shifted in Jason's expression, a microscopic recalibration, a brief moment of uncertain calculation that passed almost too quickly to observe. But Rachel had spent years reading faces in dark rooms under pressure, and she saw it clearly. "Army," he said. "Navy," she said. "Oh." He nodded, and there was something in that nod subtly condescending in the specific way of someone who has decided that acknowledging a thing is sufficient to dismiss it. "So you did some basic training, some fitness work. That's good. That's a foundation." He turned back to the class. "But there's a significant difference between military fitness training and real hand-to-hand combat discipline, the kind that prepares you for an actual encounter." "Jason." Amy again. Her voice had a harder edge now. He ignored her. "Let's actually demonstrate the point," he said. He stepped back, creating a space on the mat, and gestured toward Rachel with an open hand and a generous smile. "Come on. Let's see what military fitness looks like in a real situation. Just a demonstration, nothing serious." He looked at the class, performing magnanimity. "We'll be gentle." The room had gone very still. Linda, standing near Rachel, looked at her with an expression somewhere between sympathy and morbid curiosity. A teenage boy near the back was filming on his phone, holding it just above waist level, pretending not to be. Rachel looked at Jason Miller for a long moment. She was measuring something. Not him. She had already measured him in the first 5 minutes the way she had been trained to measure people in uncertain situations. His stance, his balance, the way he distributed his weight, the small muscular tells that preceded movement in his particular style. She had cataloged all of it automatically, the way breathing was automatic, the way her nervous system tracked threat levels without being asked to. What she was measuring now was something else. She was measuring the room, the other students, Amy, who had tried twice to intervene, the teenager with the phone, the door to the left, the owner's office at the back, where a light burned behind frosted glass. She was measuring what the right response was, not the tactically optimal response, not the one that would most efficiently resolve the situation, but the right one. The one that would do the most good and the least harm to the most people in this room. She looked at Jason's outstretched hand, and she said very quietly, "Okay." The word landed in the silence, like a stone dropped in still water. Jason grinned. He turned to the class with the expression of someone who had just confirmed something he already knew. "Great," he said. "Let's learn something today." He didn't know it yet, but he was absolutely right. They were about to learn something. He stepped into his fighting stance textbook form clean and practiced the stance of someone who had done this thousands of times in controlled environments. His weight was centered. His hands were up. He moved with the comfortable fluency of a person in their natural habitat. Rachel stood opposite him. She did not take a fighting stance. She stood with her feet roughly shoulder-width apart, arms slightly relaxed at her sides, weight distributed in a way that looked casual and was the precise opposite of casual. She had stopped performing beginner 12 seconds ago. She wasn't performing anything now. She was simply present the way she had learned to be present in rooms where being anything less than fully present was the difference between going home and not going home. Jason read her posture as nervousness, as a beginner who didn't know what stance to take. He felt his confidence expand to fill the space between them. "Go ahead," he said generously. "Whenever you're ready." Amy had stopped trying to intervene. She was watching Rachel now with a different expression. Something she couldn't quite name, something that made her fingers tighten slightly at her sides. The teenager's phone rose a little higher. Linda forgot she was holding her water bottle. Rachel looked at Jason Miller across the space between them, and she thought briefly about a night in a country she couldn't name, where she had been alone in a hallway with a man who outweighed her by 60 pounds and had very specific intentions, and she had been injured running on 17 hours without sleep, and she had made a calculation in less than 1 second that had kept her alive. She thought about Dr. Gwyn's voice, something safe, something with rules, something predictable. She almost smiled. "Whenever you're ready," Jason said again. There was the smallest edge of impatience in his voice now, because the pause was making the room uncomfortable, and Jason Miller did not like things being out of his control. Rachel said very quietly, almost to herself, "Okay." And then she moved. What happened in the next 7 seconds was something that the 30 people in that room would describe in 30 different ways for years afterward. The differences in their descriptions would say more about what each of them had been expecting than about what actually occurred. What actually occurred was this. Rachel Carter moved toward Jason Miller with exactly as much force as the situation required, and exactly as little as it could be resolved with. She did it with a precision and an economy that had nothing to do with sport and everything to do with the very specific education that comes from being responsible for human survival in environments where mistakes are permanent. She didn't hit him. She didn't throw him. She redirected. That word doesn't fully capture the physics of what happened, but it comes closer than most alternatives. She moved inside his guard before his training could tell him to close it. She found the specific point of imbalance that his stance had been carrying the entire time, and she used it. The way water finds the lowest point. Without drama, without hesitation, without any of the telegraphed buildup that had characterized every technique he had demonstrated that morning. Jason Miller found himself on the mat. He did not know how he had gotten there. He was not hurt, she had made certain of that. But he was down. He was staring up at the ceiling of his own dojo, and there was a hand extended toward him. Rachel's hand. Not offered in triumph, not in anger, just in the straightforward practicality of someone helping another person back to their feet. The room around him was completely, absolutely, unmistakably silent. He stared at her hand. 1 second. 2. 3. Then he took it. She helped him up with the same economy of movement with which she had put him down. Then she stepped back and looked at him with an expression that contained no gloating, no satisfaction at his expense, no anger. Just a steady, patient attention. The face of someone waiting to see what came next. How? He started. Stopped. Tried again. What? Stopped again. Linda let out a breath she had been holding for approximately 7 seconds, and the sound of it broke the spell. Suddenly, everyone was breathing again, and the room filled with the confused, overlapping energy of 30 people trying to process something they didn't have adequate vocabulary for. The teenager with the phone was no longer pretending. He was filming openly, mouth slightly open. Amy had her hand over her mouth. Jason looked at Rachel, and for the first time that morning, perhaps for the first time in a long time, something behind his eyes opened. Some inner room that confidence and trophies and social media had been papering over. The room where real questions lived. "Who are you?" he said. The question was quiet. It had shed all the performance that had characterized everything he'd said that morning. It was just a question. An honest one. The kind you ask when the world has just demonstrated that it's larger than your current map of it. Rachel opened her mouth to answer. And then behind her, a door opened. Heavy footsteps crossed the rubber mat in a measured, deliberate cadence. The walk of someone who had spent decades around people who knew exactly what that cadence meant. Daniel Brooks was 61 years old. He owned Pacific Coast Martial Arts Academy. He had served 22 years in the United States Marine Corps, 2 tours in Iraq, 1 as a training instructor at Quantico, and had spent the last 15 years trying to build something in this civilian space that honored the discipline and community the Corps had given him without losing sight of what that discipline was actually for. He had been watching through the window of his office door for the last 4 minutes. He walked to the center of the mat and stopped between Jason and Rachel. But he wasn't looking at Jason. He was looking at Rachel. And the way he was looking at her, not with surprise, not with confusion, but with a very specific recognition. The look of someone seeing something they understand deeply and have not seen in a long time changed the temperature of the room all over again. "I heard something happening out here," Daniel said, his voice carrying the particular quality of a man who never needed to raise it to be heard. "Wanted to see." He looked at Rachel for a long moment. Then he said to no one in particular, to everyone, "You weren't trained in a dojo." It wasn't a question. "No," Rachel said. "Where?" he said. A pause. "I can't tell you all of it," she said. Daniel nodded, slow and certain, the nod of someone whose hypothesis has just been confirmed. "No," he said. "I don't suppose you can." He turned to face the class. 30 students stood in a loose formation, most of them wearing expressions somewhere on the spectrum between awe and confusion. Jason Miller stood with his arms at his sides, looking at Rachel Carter with the particular expression of someone whose understanding of the world is being revised in real time. Daniel said, "This woman's name is Rachel Carter. Some of you know your military branches well enough to follow what I'm about to tell you. Some of you are going to want to look it up later." He paused. Rachel served as a combat medic attached to Navy SEAL operations. She served for 11 years. She deployed to some of the most dangerous operational environments in the world. She kept people alive, our people, American servicemen and women, in conditions that most of us cannot imagine, and most of us will never have to. He looked at Jason. "That is what you saw today. That is what you felt. That is what you were up against." The room was absolutely silent. Jason Miller stared at Rachel Carter. And something happened on his face. Something genuine. Something unperformed. Something that bypassed all the competition trophies and the social media subscribers and the carefully constructed narrative of himself as someone who understood what was real. Something that looked quietly like the beginning of understanding. Outside in the parking lot, a car drove past. A bird called from somewhere in the trees along the building's edge. The afternoon light through the high windows had shifted, moving across the mat in the slow, patient way of light that has no agenda. Rachel stood in the middle of it and breathed. She had not wanted this. She had not come here for this. She had come here for the ordinary thing, the simple, desperately wanted ordinary thing of being a person in a room, trying to learn something new, without the weight of everything she had survived pressing down on her from every direction. But she was standing here, and 30 people were looking at her. And for once, for the first time in 14 months of trying to relearn how to exist in a world that felt too quiet and too unpredictable and too full of people who didn't understand, she felt just barely the beginning of something she hadn't been sure she would ever find again. Not peace, not yet, but the territory adjacent to it, the ground you have to cross to get there. She looked at Jason Miller, who was still watching her with those new open eyes. And she said, "But you had good instincts about this psychological part, about the mind being the first weapon." He blinked. "You were just wrong about which mind was the problem," she said. He stood there and absorbed that. And around them slowly, the room began to breathe again. Daniel Brooks did not linger on the mat after he spoke. He stood there for a moment, looking at Jason with the particular patience of a man who had watched many young people encounter hard lessons and understood that the encounter itself was the whole point. Then he turned and walked back toward his office without another word. The door closed quietly behind him. Not slammed, not dramatic. Just closed the sound of a man who trusted consequences to do their own work. That was when the room fully broke open. Everyone started talking at once. Not loudly, not in the chaotic way of a crowd that has witnessed something violent, but in the low, urgent, shoulder-to-shoulder way of people who have just seen something they don't fully understand and are trying to triangulate reality through each other. 30 students turning to the person beside them, asking the same questions in different words. "Did you see that? Did you know? How did she? What did he say?" Jason had not moved. He was standing in the center of the mat, his hands at his sides. His black belt, which 2 hours ago had felt like the most significant thing in the room, now hung around his waist, like punctuation at the end of a sentence that no longer said what he thought it said. His 3 senior students, Marcus Devon and a young woman named Chloe, who had been training under him for 18 months, stood a few feet away. None of them were making eye contact with him, which was its own kind of verdict. Marcus was the first to say something. "Jason." His voice was careful. The way you talk to someone standing near an edge. "Hey, you good?" Jason looked at him. "I'm fine," he said. His voice came out flat and controlled the voice of someone managing the distance between what they feel and what they're willing to show. Marcus nodded slowly and did not look like he believed him. Rachel had moved to the edge of the mat and was reaching for her water bottle. She drank slowly, deliberately, her back half turned to the room, not because she was avoiding the attention, but because she genuinely didn't know what to do with it. This was the part she had never trained for, the after. The moment when the tactical situation is resolved and you're left standing in whatever it left behind. Linda appeared at her side, Linda, who had been standing next to her during the warm-up. Linda, whose water bottle Rachel had watched roll silently to the wall during those 7 seconds. Linda, who was now looking at Rachel with an expression that had moved well past curiosity into something more complicated, something that lived in the neighborhood of recognition, even though Linda had never served a day in uniform and couldn't have told you exactly what she was recognizing. "Are you okay?" Linda asked. Rachel looked at her. "I'm fine." "That was—" Linda stopped. Started again. "That was not what I was expecting from this morning." Rachel almost smiled. "Me neither." "Can I ask?" Linda hesitated. "The Navy SEAL thing. That's true. Like that's actually true." "Combat medic," Rachel said. "Attached to SEAL operations. It's not exactly the same as—" Linda made a gesture with her hand that somehow communicated an entire sentence. "Everything he said about what you did, the deployments, that's real." Rachel was quiet for a moment. Outside, a car passed. Someone across the room dropped a water bottle and swore softly. "Yeah," Rachel said finally. "That's real." Linda was quiet for a beat. Then she said very simply, "Thank you for your service." The phrase was so completely genuine, so stripped of the reflexive quality it sometimes had, that Rachel felt something move in her chest in a way that surprised her. "Thank you," Rachel said, and she meant it. Across the mat. Jason had not moved. He was watching Rachel and Linda talk, and his expression had gone through several phases in the last few minutes. Shock. Then the particular blankness of someone whose mind is working faster than their face can keep up with. Then something that looked dangerously close to the early stages of shame. Not the performative shame of someone who has been publicly embarrassed and is calculating damage control. The other kind. The slower, quieter kind that doesn't announce itself, that just sits down somewhere inside your chest and starts going through everything you thought you knew. Marcus put a hand on his shoulder. "Hey, come on, walk it off." "I put my hands on her," Jason said. Marcus went still. "I shoved her," Jason said. His voice had dropped to something almost private. "In front of everyone. I grabbed her and I shoved her and I stood there and I laughed about it." He stopped. "She's a combat medic. She saved people's lives. She deployed overseas and she kept people alive. And she walked in here and I—" He stopped again. Marcus didn't say anything. There was nothing to say that Jason wasn't already saying to himself. Which was the most painful kind of accounting. Chloe, who had been quiet the entire time, said quietly, "You didn't know who she was." Jason looked at her. "You didn't know," Chloe said. "Which is kind of the point, isn't it?" She said it without cruelty, just as a fact. The kind of fact that lands harder than anything cruel could. Jason looked back across the mat at Rachel. And Rachel, who was no longer talking to Linda, turned slightly, and her eyes found Jason's. For a moment, the two of them were just looking at each other across 30 feet of rubber mat and everything that had happened on it in the last 20 minutes. Jason took a step toward her, then another. His senior students watched him cross the mat and the room gradually registered what was happening, and the scattered conversations died down one by one until the whole room was quiet again. But this time, it was a different kind of quiet. Not the stunned silence of 7 seconds ago. The attentive quiet of people witnessing something they recognize as important. Jason stopped in front of her. He was taller than her by several inches. He had his black belt and his trophies and his 80,000 views and 2 years of authority in this room. He had all of that. And he stood in front of her like a man who had just realized that none of it counted for what he thought it counted for. "I owe you an apology," he said. Rachel looked at him steadily. "I put my hands on you without your permission," he said. "I mocked you in front of everyone. I made assumptions about you based on—" He paused. In the pause you could hear him rejecting several easier formulations before landing on the honest one. Based on how you looked, what you were wearing, how you carried yourself. Another pause. "I was wrong. I was completely wrong, and I knew I was being unkind while I was doing it, and I did it anyway because I thought I could." He looked at her. "I'm sorry, Rachel." The room was absolutely still. Amy, standing near the wall, had her arms crossed over her chest. Her expression was careful, not satisfaction, not relief, but the watchful attention of someone waiting to see whether a genuinely important moment is going to be handled with the care it deserves. Rachel studied Jason's face for a long moment. She had learned over years of operating in high-pressure environments, with people whose lives depended on accurate assessment to tell the difference between a performance of sincerity and the actual thing. The difference was usually in the eyes, in whether the person held your gaze steadily or kept glancing away to check the audience, in whether the words came out in the rhythm of someone who had rehearsed them or someone who was finding them in real time. Jason's eyes held. His words came out in real time. "Okay," Rachel said. He blinked. He had been prepared for more, for conditions, for anger, for a speech about what he had done and what it meant. He had not been prepared for the simplicity of okay. That's it," he said. "That's it," Rachel said. "You apologized. You meant it. That's what an apology is." He stood there for a moment, absorbing this. Then something happened on his face. Not a smile. Not yet. It was too early for that, but a slight loosening. A small easing of the tension around his jaw and eyes. The expression of someone who has been carrying a weight and has just felt the first hint that they might be allowed to set it down. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You can ask. How did you do that?" He shook his head slowly. "What you did. The 7 seconds. How does I've been training for over a decade. I know my technique. I know my center of balance. I know exactly what my vulnerabilities are in that stance, and I've spent years eliminating them. And you found one in..." He shook his head again. "How?" Rachel was quiet for a moment. She looked at him and thought about how to say something true without saying more than she was ready to say. "You've been trained to fight," she said finally. "That's real. That training is real and it matters, and you're good at it." She paused. "But there's a difference between being trained to fight and being trained to read a body under pressure. The kind of reading I'm talking about isn't about technique. It's about understanding what a human body reveals when it believes it's in control." She looked at him. "When you stepped onto this mat this morning, you were completely confident. You had home advantage, audience advantage, experience advantage. You knew all of that. And because you knew it, you were relaxed. And when you were relaxed," she paused, "you stopped protecting yourself. Not physically, psychologically. You stopped accounting for the thing you hadn't considered yet." Jason was listening in a way he hadn't listened to anything in a very long time. Not with the half attention of someone building their response while the other person talks. Fully. With everything. "The thing you hadn't considered," he said slowly. "Was me," Rachel said. Silence. Then Devon, who had not said a single word since everything happened, who had been standing near the edge of the mat with his arms folded and his expression unreadable, cleared his throat and said, "So, what do we do now?" Everyone looked at him. "I'm serious," Devon said. "Like, what do we do? We still have class for another 40 minutes. Do we just..." He gestured vaguely at the mat. It was such a genuinely human question. So perfectly ordinary in the middle of something that had been anything but ordinary. Rachel laughed, not a polite laugh, a real one, short and surprised, the kind that escapes before you can decide whether to let it out. And the realness of it changed the room in a way that nothing else had. It broke something open. Let some air in. Reminded 30 people that they were all just human beings, standing on a rubber mat, trying to figure out what came next. Several other people laughed too, including, after a moment, Jason. It was the first time Rachel had seen him laugh without an audience in mind. It was a different laugh than the one he'd been performing all morning. Quieter, more uncertain, more real. And that was the moment. Not the 7 seconds. Not Daniel's revelation. Not the apology. That was the moment when Rachel felt the territory shift under her feet. Something she hadn't been expecting. Something that made her think, against the background noise of 14 months of uncertainty and struggle, that maybe this particular room was not a mistake. That was 47 minutes into the morning. The second half of class was different in every way from the first. Jason did not try to reassert authority. He did not attempt to reframe what had happened, or smooth it over with enthusiasm, or redirect everyone toward a fresh topic designed to make them forget. He did something harder than any of that. He asked Rachel to teach, not formally, not in a way that abdicated his role, or turned the class over to her entirely. He simply, when the class reconvened on the mat after a water break that had turned into a 20-minute collective processing session, looked at Rachel and said, "Would you be willing to share anything, something you think is useful?" The class waited. Rachel stood still for a long moment. She thought about saying no. The reflex was strong, the deeply ingrained habit of protecting herself from exposure, of keeping the things she knew in the private space where they felt safe, of not becoming a performance for other people's benefit. But she also thought about Amy, who had tried twice to stop something from happening and hadn't been listened to. About Linda, who had asked a genuine question and deserved a genuine answer. About the teenager whose phone was now sitting face down in his bag, which was its own small thing. She thought about what Dr. Gwynn had said 3 months ago about reconnecting, about finding a place where her body could remember that it was okay. She looked at Jason. "Okay," she said. She walked to the center of the mat. 30 people watched her. And this time the watching was different. An hour ago they had watched her the way people watch someone they expect to fail, with that particular anticipatory attention that is simultaneously sympathy and voyeurism. Now they watched her the way people watch someone they recognize as a source, someone who has something real to offer. She stood in the center of the mat and she said, "The most important thing I was ever taught was not a technique." She let that sit. "It was a question," she continued. "The question was, what do you actually know right now in this moment, versus what are you assuming?" She looked around the room slowly. "In every high-pressure situation I have ever been in, every single one, the mistakes that cost the most happened because someone was operating on an assumption they hadn't checked. Not because they were cowards, not because they didn't know enough technique, because they believed they already knew what the situation was. So they stopped paying attention to what the situation actually was." The room was so quiet, Rachel could hear the ventilation system above the ceiling tiles. That question, what do I actually know, versus what am I assuming, is a physical practice, she said. Not just a mental one. It means training your body to stay open to information even when your brain is already convinced it knows the answer. She paused. "Most of you came in here today knowing things. You knew where you were in this room, beginner, intermediate, advanced. You knew what class looked like, and who taught it, and what your role was. That knowledge is useful. It's also a wall, because when something shows up that doesn't fit what you know..." She stopped. "Your brain's first move is not to update the knowledge. It's to reject the information." Jason made a sound. A low, involuntary sound, not a word, just an acknowledgement. The sound of someone recognizing themselves in something. How do you train past that? It was Amy who asked from her position near the sidewall. Her voice was focused and direct, the voice of someone who had been waiting for the conversation to arrive here. "You practice being wrong," Rachel said. "On purpose, regularly. You put yourself in situations where your assumptions don't hold, and you pay attention to what happens in your body when reality contradicts what you expected." She looked at Amy. "Not so you can be humble, that's a byproduct. You do it because in an actual crisis, the half-second between reality contradicting your expectation and your brain accepting the update is the half-second that gets people hurt. The training narrows that gap." Amy stared at her. "Where did you learn this?" Rachel was quiet for a moment. "From people who needed me to know it," she said. It was the most she was going to say about that. Everyone in the room seemed to understand the way you understand that certain statements are borders rather than walls. Not refusing entry, just marking the perimeter of what can be asked. The class ran another 35 minutes. Rachel did not take over. She stayed at the edges, offered things when asked, watched. The watching was its own kind of participation, the particular focused attention of someone who is genuinely interested in what they're seeing. And 3 or 4 students noticed it and found themselves trying harder because of it. The way you try harder when you sense that someone who truly understands what they're looking at is paying attention. Jason taught the second half of class differently than he had ever taught before. Not dramatically differently. The techniques were the same, The structure was the same, but the quality of his attention had changed. He was listening more, asking more questions, instead of issuing more statements. Twice he caught himself starting to demonstrate something in a way that was more about showing than teaching. Both times he visibly pulled back. Simplified. Ask the student what they noticed instead of telling them what to see. It was early. It was rough around the edges, but it was real. At 11:45, he called class. The students dispersed gradually, some heading for the locker rooms, others lingering on the mat in small groups. The conversations were quiet and textured in the way conversations get when something has genuinely happened and people are still inside it. Linda found Rachel near the edge of the mat and pressed a piece of paper into her hand. "My number," she said. "In case you want someone to get coffee with. No pressure, just—" She paused. "You seem like someone who could use a friend who isn't going to make it weird." Rachel looked at the paper, then at Linda. "Thank you," she said. "Also," Linda said, "for what it's worth, I'm really glad you didn't leave in the parking lot." Rachel looked at her sharply. "I saw you sitting in your car," Linda said simply. "For a while. I almost knocked on your window, but I didn't want to be that person." She shrugged. "I'm glad you came in." Rachel folded the paper and put it in her bag. She was heading for the locker room. When she heard her name not called out, just said in a voice that was trying to make itself smaller than it usually was, "Jason." Howe was standing near the door to Daniel's office, his gear bag over one shoulder. His black belt, she noticed, was not around his waist anymore. He had taken it off. He held it folded in his hand, which was either a coincidence or the most honest thing he had done all morning. "Can I say something else?" he said. "Or are you— I know you probably want to go." Rachel stopped. "Go ahead." He looked at the belt in his hands, then at her. "I've been teaching this class for 2 years," he said. "And I know I'm good at what I do. That's not ego, I've put in the work. I know that." He paused. "But I think somewhere along the way, I started believing that knowing made me better than people who didn't know. Better in a way that—" He shook his head. "Better in a way I didn't actually earn." He looked at her steadily. "I don't think what I did this morning was an accident," he said. "I think it was something I've been doing for a long time, and it just took this morning for it to be visible enough that I couldn't explain it away." He paused. "I don't know what to do with that yet, but I wanted to say it out loud to the person who made it visible." He took a breath. "So, thank you, for not walking out, for being in this room, and for not breaking my arm when you obviously could have." Rachel looked at him for a long moment. "You're going to be a good teacher," she said. He blinked. I'm not sure I deserve that yet." "I know," she said. "That's how I know it's true." She walked through the main room into the locker room and sat down on the bench in front of her locker. She did not move for approximately 3 minutes. She sat with her hands on her knees, and she breathed in and out, the specific, deliberate breathing Dr. Gwynn had taught her, the kind that tells your nervous system the crisis is over, that the ground is solid, that you are okay. She thought about the morning. She had come here for the ordinary thing, for the small human luxury of being a body in a room doing something physical without the weight of anyone else's survival on her shoulders. She had come here to practice being a beginner, to practice being nobody in particular. Instead, she had been herself, completely, undeniably, publicly herself, in a way she had not been in 14 months. In a way, she had been both dreading and quietly starving for without fully acknowledging it. Her phone buzzed. She took it out and looked at the screen. An unsaved number. She almost ignored it. Then she read it. "This is Amy from class. I got your number from the sign-in sheet. I hope that's okay. I wanted to say something without an audience. What you said today about training to be wrong on purpose. I've been a therapist for 12 years, and I've never heard anyone articulate that the way you did. I don't know what you went through. I'm not asking. But I think you have something that's very hard to find, and I would be very sad if you didn't come back." Rachel read it twice. She put her phone in her bag. She changed back into her street clothes, rolled her gray workout shirt, and tucked it beside her shoes, zipped the bag and stood up. She thought about Dr. Gwynn. About the 11 minutes in the parking lot. About the 11 years before that. About the 14 months since. About all the rooms she had walked into carrying things nobody could see, and all the rooms she had left without putting any of it down. She thought about Jason Miller holding his black belt folded in his hand. She thought about Linda's phone number sitting in the front pocket of her bag. She thought about Amy's message. She walked to the door of the locker room, pushed it through, and stepped into the hallway. Through the double doors ahead of her, she could hear the sounds of the room being reset. Matt's straightened equipment stored. The ordinary sounds of a space returning to itself after something significant had happened in it. She stood in the hallway for a moment. Then she walked to the front desk, where the teenager in the too large t-shirt was putting his phone away with the guilty speed of someone who had spent the last hour on social media. "Hey," Rachel said. "What time does the next beginner class meet?" He looked up. "Thursday, 7 p.m. Rachel nodded. "Can you put me on the roster?" He reached for the clipboard. "Name," he said, though he clearly already knew. "Rachel Carter," she said. He wrote it down. She walked out of Pacific Coast Martial Arts Academy into the afternoon and got into her car and sat in the same seat where she had spent 11 minutes that morning, negotiating with herself about whether to go inside. She thought about all the things that had been true about her in those 11 minutes that were still true now. The scars under her sleeves. The memories she didn't talk about. The profound and daily difficulty of being a person who had lived at the extreme edge of human experience and was now trying to learn how to exist in the ordinary middle of it. All of that was still true. But something had been added. Something small. Something she was being careful not to look at directly the way you are careful with something fragile. The way you carry something in open hands instead of a closed fist, because you understand that the closing is what breaks it. She started the car. She pulled out of the parking lot. And for the first time in 14 months, she did not check every mirror twice before she reached the road. She came back on Thursday. 7 p.m. Exactly, not a minute early, not a minute late. Because Rachel Carter had spent 11 years operating in environments where timing was the difference between mission success and catastrophe, and old habits did not disappear just because the context changed. She pushed through the front door with her canvas bag over one shoulder and her gray workout clothes already on under her jacket. And the teenager at the front desk looked up and said, "Hey, you're on the roster," with the particular enthusiasm of someone who had clearly been told to watch for her. The main floor was different at 7 p.m. than it had been Tuesday morning. Fuller. Louder. The energy of people who had come straight from work carrying the compressed tension of 8-hour days in offices and cars and meetings, trying to shake it loose before they went home. Roughly 40 students moving around the edges of the mat, the sound of shoes on rubber, the particular rhythm of people warming up their bodies, and Rachel's nervous system recognized it and settled into it before her brain had a chance to have an opinion about it. Jason was at the front of the room. He saw her the moment she walked through the double doors. Their eyes met across the width of the mat, and something passed between them. Not a smile, not yet, but an acknowledgement. The specific look of two people who have been through something together that neither of them will ever fully explain to anyone who wasn't there. He gave her a small nod. She gave him one back. She found a spot near the middle of the room this time. Not the back corner, not hiding. The middle where the work happened. The woman next to her was completely new. The kind of new where every movement had a slight delay while the brain translated instruction into action. She was maybe 45, with the careful posture of someone working hard to look like she knew what she was doing. Rachel recognized that posture intimately. She had worn it herself in different rooms, different contexts, more times than she could count. "First time?" Rachel asked. The woman looked over, startled that someone was talking to her. "That obvious?" "A little," Rachel said, not unkindly. "It gets easier." "Did it take you long?" the woman asked. Rachel considered the question honestly. "I'm still working on it," she said. The woman laughed, surprised. "That's not exactly reassuring." "It's not meant to be reassuring," Rachel said. "It's meant to be true." The woman stuck out her hand. "Carol." "Rachel." Jason clapped twice. Class began. For the first 20 minutes, everything was ordinary. Warm-up basic technique reviewed the structured rhythm of a class that knew its own routine. Rachel participated without calling attention to herself, moving through the exercises with the deliberate restraint she had practiced on Tuesday, not performing beginner, but not performing anything else either. Just being present. Just doing the work. And then Jason did something that stopped her. He stopped the class mid-drill and said, "Actually, hold on." He looked across the room at Rachel. "Carter, can you come up here for a second?" The room shifted. 40-plus people turned to look at her. Carol beside her made a small sound of surprise. Rachel walked to the front of the room. She moved through the assembled students and stopped beside Jason on the center of the mat. She looked out at the faces looking back at her and felt the old familiar pull of exposure, the sensation of being visible when everything in her had been trained toward invisibility. "Some of you were here Tuesday," Jason said to the class. "Most of you weren't. So I'm going to say something now that I should have made official then." He turned slightly, not quite facing Rachel, but addressing both her and the class simultaneously. "This is Rachel Carter. She's going to be a regular part of this class." He paused, and she could hear him choosing his words with care, which was already different from the Jason of Tuesday morning, who had never considered a word before saying it. "I've asked her if she'd be willing to share some of what she knows with us. Not as an instructor, as someone who has a different kind of experience than most of us have." He looked at Rachel. "I told you Thursday. I meant it." Rachel looked at him. "You could have warned me," she said quietly. "I was afraid you'd say no," he said, just as quietly, just as honestly. She held his gaze for a moment. "You're not wrong," she said. She turned to face the class. She had not prepared anything. She had come here to train, not to teach. And the part of her that was still navigating the daily difficulty of civilian life wanted to point that out firmly and walk back to her spot near Carol and let Jason run his class. But there was another part, a quieter part one, that had been getting slightly less quiet since Tuesday afternoon, that understood something about this moment that the resistant part was trying to ignore. This room had given her something on Tuesday. Not the exposure, not the revelation she would have traded to avoid, but something else. Something that had happened in the second half of class, and in the parking lot afterward, and in Linda's note, and in Amy's late-night text. Something that felt when she was honest with herself at 11 p.m., in her apartment, with the lights still on, like the very early fragile beginning of a reason to get up the next day, that had nothing to do with survival and everything to do with living. She owed this room something back. "Okay," she said. She looked out at the faces. 40-odd people of different ages, different backgrounds, different reasons for being here on a Thursday night. She looked at Carol at the back, who was watching her with the particular attention of someone who had just realized the woman she'd been making small talk with was something she hadn't accounted for. "I want to ask you all something," Rachel said. "And I want you to actually think about it before you answer, even if you don't answer out loud." She paused. "When you walked in here tonight, what did you think you came here to learn?" Silence. A few people exchanged glances. "Technique," said a young man near the front. Maybe 20 confident in the way of someone who hadn't yet learned that confidence had grades. "How to fight," said someone else. "Okay," Rachel said. "And if someone attacked you tomorrow, someone bigger than you, faster than you, who had the element of surprise, would the technique you learned tonight save you?" The young man started to say yes. Then he stopped. Rachel waited. "Maybe," he said finally, less certain. "Maybe," she said. "Depending on a lot of things. Depending on whether you're tired, whether you're scared, whether the situation looks anything like the situation you practice for." She looked around the room. Technique matters. It matters enormously. But technique is the last thing that happens in a real crisis. Before technique, there's recognition. Before recognition, there's attention. Before attention, there's a decision made, usually below the level of conscious thought, about whether you are someone who responds or someone who freezes. She let that land. That decision gets made before anything else. And unlike technique, it can't be drilled in a controlled environment. It has to be built. The room was very quiet. Jason was standing to her left, arms at his sides, listening with his whole body. How do you build it? Carol asked. Her voice came from the back, clear and direct, free of performance, genuine want to know. You put yourself in rooms where you're not comfortable, Rachel said. You do things you're not sure you can do regularly on purpose. Not because suffering is good for you. It isn't inherently. But because your nervous system learns what it lives. If it only ever lives certainty, it will not know what to do with uncertainty. She paused. And real life is almost entirely uncertainty. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound was the ventilation system and someone shifting their weight on the mat. Then Jason said, "Can we try something?" He looked at Rachel. "With your permission," he said, and the deliberateness of that phrase. The explicit, careful asking was so different from Tuesday that several students who had been at Tuesday's class noticed it and exchanged glances. "What do you have in mind?" Rachel said. What Jason proposed was simple on its surface. Students paired with someone they had never worked with before, outside their usual training level, asked to accomplish a specific physical objective, requiring both partners to communicate without defaulting to whoever was more experienced taking control. It sounded straightforward. It was not straightforward. Within 4 minutes, the mat was alive with the productive chaos of 40 people discovering that cooperation under mild physical pressure was significantly harder than either competition or instruction, because it required you to stay genuinely uncertain about the outcome, while also staying genuinely present for your partner. Rachel moved through the pairs, watching occasionally, offering a single observation. Not correction, an observation. The kind that opened a door rather than closed one. She reached a pair near the center. The confident 20-year-old Tyler, she learned, partnered with a man in his mid-50s named Gerald, who had been coming to class for 3 weeks and had the careful, deliberate quality of someone taking something seriously that they had decided possibly late in life that they should have started earlier. Tyler was struggling. Not physically. Technically. Tyler was the better athlete, and he knew it. And that knowledge was making him useless as a partner. Because every time Gerald needed a half-second to process and respond, Tyler's body moved to compensate, to smooth over, to fix. And Gerald, who was trying to learn to trust his own responses under pressure, kept having the rug pulled out from under him by a 20-year-old who thought he was helping. Rachel stopped beside them. "Tyler." He looked up. "I'm letting him lead," he said immediately. Defensively. "Your hands say otherwise," Rachel said. He looked at his hands. He opened his mouth. He closed it. "What happens in your body," Rachel said, "when you watch someone take longer than you would to do something?" Tyler thought about it. "I want to step in," he said. "Right," Rachel said. "And stepping in feels like help. But what it actually is." "Taking over," Gerald said quietly. Both Tyler and Rachel looked at him. Gerald was looking at Tyler with an expression that was not angry, not hurt, just honest. The expression of a man who has spent 55 years navigating a world that frequently moved faster than he needed it to. "I was a teacher," Gerald said. 30 years, 3rd grade. And the hardest thing I ever had to learn was that when a child is working something out even slowly, even struggling, the moment you step in and finish it for them, you haven't helped them. You've taken the learning." He looked at his hands. "I should have remembered that when I got on this side of it." Tyler stared at Gerald. Then he said, "That's yeah." He stopped. "Okay, let's try again. I'll wait." "Take all the time you need," Tyler said. And this time, he meant it. Rachel moved on. She was near the edge of the mat when she felt, rather than heard, someone approach from behind, a slight change in the air, the specific quality of someone who was trying to be unobtrusive and was skilled enough at it to almost succeed. She turned. Daniel Brooks. Standing 3 feet behind her, arms at his sides, watching the class with the deep, patient quality of attention that characterized everything he did, gathering something he would not necessarily share immediately. "You're teaching," Daniel said quietly. Not accusatory, just noting a fact. "Jason asked me to share something," Rachel said, equally quiet. "Uh-huh." He watched Tyler and Gerald work through the exercise with visible effort on both sides. Then he said, "How long did it take you to say yes?" Rachel considered. "About 4 seconds." Daniel nodded. That's faster than Tuesday, he said. She looked at him. You're keeping track. I'm paying attention, he said. There's a difference. He paused, watching the mat. You know, when I opened this place, I thought I was building a martial arts academy. 15 years later, I understand I was building something else. He glanced at her. You understand that better than most people who walk through that door, including some who've been walking through it for years. Rachel said nothing for a moment. Then, why did you say what you said on Tuesday to the class? About me. You didn't have to do that. Daniel was quiet for a beat. No, he said. I didn't have to. So why? He turned to look at her directly. Because Jason needed to understand something that I couldn't tell him. I could say the words to him 100 times, don't judge what you can't see, don't mistake visible experience for the only kind that matters, and he would nod and agree and not change anything. He paused. But you showed him in 7 seconds, in a way that will not leave him. And the class needed to understand what they had just seen, or it would become a story about a woman who surprised the instructor, and everything that mattered about it would get lost. He looked back at the mat. I didn't tell them to make you visible. I told them because the truth was the only thing that would make the lesson stick. Rachel absorbed that. Did you know? She asked. Before class on Tuesday, did you already know who I was? Daniel hesitated. 1 beat. 2. I had a sense, he said. What kind of sense? The kind you develop, he said carefully, after 22 years of service and 15 years watching people walk through that door. He paused. The way you moved. The way you held the room without trying to. The way your eyes tracked exits. He looked at her. I didn't know specifically, but I knew you weren't what Jason thought you were. I was waiting to see what you would do about it. Rachel turned to face him fully. And if I had just walked out, if I'd taken my bag and left when he started in on me? Daniel held her gaze steadily. Then I would have gone after you in the parking lot, he said. And I would have told you that what happened in there was not representative of what this place is supposed to be. And I would have asked you to give it one more chance. He paused. And if you'd said no, I would have accepted that. But I would have asked. Something tightened in Rachel's chest. Not painfully the way things tighten when they're being released. You could have stopped it earlier, she said. You were watching. You could have come out sooner. Yes, Daniel said simply. Why didn't you? I was quiet for a long moment. Because Jason needed to encounter his own limits, he said. And because he paused, weighing something, because I had a feeling you were capable of encountering them for him in a way that would actually change something. Not just embarrass him. Change something. He looked at her. I was hoping I was right. Rachel thought about this. You took a risk, she said. With me as the instrument of that lesson. Yes, he said. I did. He met her eyes and did not look away. And if I was wrong, I owe you an apology that is going to take considerably longer than the one Jason gave you. Rachel held his gaze for a moment. Then she turned back to the mat where 40 people were working through something hard in the specific productive way that meant they were getting somewhere real. I'll let you know, she said. Daniel almost smiled. Fair enough, he said. He walked back toward his office, and she watched him go for a moment before turning back to the class. Carol had been paired with Amy, who turned out to be a regular Thursday student, as well as the Amy who had sent Rachel a text 2 days ago at 11 p.m. The two of them were working through the exercise with a focused intensity that suggested both were people who brought everything they had to things they decided to take seriously. Amy caught Rachel's eye from across the mat and gave her a look that communicated in the compressed language of women who understand each other, something in the vicinity of, I'm glad you're here. Rachel gave her a small nod back. Class ran until 8:45. When Jason called time, something happened that Rachel had not seen at the end of Tuesday's class. Several students, instead of heading immediately for the locker rooms or the door, stayed on the mat. Talking. Not the dispersing conversations of people who had fulfilled an obligation and were ready to leave, but the settling in quality of people who were not quite ready to let go of what had been happening in the room. Tyler found Gerald near the water cooler and said, Hey, that thing you said about 3rd grade, Can I ask you something about it? Gerald looked at him with the careful attention of a man who had not expected to be sought out by a 20-year-old tonight and was recalibrating accordingly. Sure, he said. Ask. Carol appeared beside Rachel while she was putting her bag over her shoulder. That thing you said, Carol said, about putting yourself in rooms where you're not comfortable, on purpose. Yeah, Rachel said. Is that what you were doing on Tuesday? Carol asked. Coming here. Rachel thought about the 11 minutes in the parking lot, the engine going on and off, the negotiation with herself in the car. Yeah, she said. That's what I was doing. Carol nodded slowly. Did it work? Rachel considered the question. She thought about the morning, about Jason's hand on her shoulder, the shove, the laugh. About Daniel's voice saying her name and her record to a room full of strangers. About the 7 seconds on the mat. About the apology. About Linda's phone number. About Amy's text at 11 p.m. About Thursday's class. About Gerald's voice saying you've taken the learning. About Tyler saying I'll wait and meaning it. About the fact that she was still here at 8:47 on a Thursday evening, standing on a rubber mat in a suburban dojo outside San Diego, with her canvas bag over her shoulder and 40-odd people around her who now knew something real about her and had not run from it. Yeah, she said. I think it worked. Carol smiled. Good, she said. Because I'm coming back on Tuesday, and I'd really like you to be here. Rachel looked at her. Why? Carol tilted her head slightly the way people do when they're trying to figure out how to say something true. Because when you talked tonight, she said, it was the first time since I walked through that door 3 weeks ago that I felt like someone was talking to me. Not performing. Not instructing. Talking to me. She paused. Like you actually understood that this is hard. That doing something hard is actually hard. And that's not a weakness. It's not a weakness, Rachel said. I know, Carol said. That's why I needed to hear it. Tuesday, Rachel said. Tuesday, Carol said. She was almost at the front door when Jason caught up with her. He was moving quickly with the slightly urgent quality of someone who had decided to say something before they talked themselves out of it. Hey, he said. She stopped. He caught up with her, and they stood near the front desk, the teenager diplomatically finding something to do on the other side of the reception area. Jason had his gear bag over one shoulder and his keys in his hand, and the expression of someone who had been carrying a thought for several hours and was ready to put it down. I watched you tonight, he said. What you did with Tyler and Gerald. The question you asked at the beginning. The way you were with the class. He stopped. You've done this before, not the teaching. Whatever it is you were doing, reading people, meeting them where they are. Rachel waited. I'm trying to say that you're good at it, he said. At a level that I don't have. At a level I'm not sure I can train into myself. Or if it's something that only comes from, he gestured vaguely, from what you've been through. Rachel shook her head. You're wrong about that, she said. He looked at her. It comes from paying attention, she said. That's all it is. Sustained, disciplined, genuine attention to other people. You can train that. She looked at him. You started training it tonight with Tyler. You could see it happening. Jason thought about that. I was watching Tyler, he said slowly. I was about to step in and tell him what he was doing wrong. And then you just asked him one question, and he worked it out himself. He paused. I never would have let him have that long. Why not? He was quiet for a moment. Because silence makes me uncomfortable, he said. Watching someone struggle makes me uncomfortable. I always want to fix it. That's not a bad instinct, Rachel said. In the right measure. But when it's running on automatic, when you step in before the other person has had a chance to discover what they're capable of, you're not fixing their problem. She held his gaze. You're fixing your discomfort. Jason stared at her. I just heard that applied to teaching, he said quietly. And now I'm hearing it applied to everything else I do. He looked at the door. That's a lot to take in on a Thursday. Yeah, Rachel said. It is. He looked at her. Are you going to keep coming? I told Carol I'd be here Tuesday, Rachel said. Something in Jason's expression shifted. Not relief exactly, something that lived near gratitude and hadn't decided how to announce itself yet. "Okay," he said. "Good." He paused. "Rachel." She waited. "I'm going to be different," he said. "As a teacher, I've been thinking about it since Tuesday. About what I've been doing here, about what this place is supposed to be, and what I've been making it about instead." He looked at her directly. "I don't know how long it takes to actually change something you've been doing wrong for a long time, but I'm going to try." Rachel held his gaze. "I know you are," she said. She pushed through the front door and walked across the parking lot and got into her car, and this time she did not sit for 11 minutes. She put her bag on the passenger seat, started the engine, and pulled out of the lot in under 30 seconds. She drove home. At a red light 3 blocks from her apartment, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it at the next light when the car was stopped. It was from a number she had saved 2 days ago under the name Linda. It said, "Tuesday coffee before class. There's a place 2 blocks from the dojo. Mediocre coffee, excellent muffins, 0 pressure. Yes or no?" Rachel looked at the message for a moment. Then she typed back, "Yes." She drove the rest of the way home, with both hands on the wheel in the specific quality of attention she gave to things she was choosing rather than surviving. And somewhere behind her sternum, in the particular space that had been so quiet for so very long, something continued its slow, patient, fragile work of becoming less quiet. She parked. She turned off the engine. She sat in the car for 30 seconds, not the old 11 minutes of negotiation and doubt, just 30 seconds of something she was still learning to identify. Something in the neighborhood of okay. Something in the vicinity of here. Then she got out of the car. She went upstairs. She made tea. She sat at her kitchen table in the quiet of her apartment with the lights on, and she did not think about exits, and she did not check the locks 3 times, and she did not sit with her back to the wall. She just sat at the table and drank her tea while San Diego moved through its ordinary Thursday night around her, and she let it. 3 weeks after that Thursday night, Rachel Carter had a routine. It was a small thing. An ordinary thing. The kind of thing most people built almost without noticing, accumulated, without effort, maintained without thought. But Rachel had spent 14 months without one, drifting through days that had no architecture, no predictable shape, no reliable points of contact between herself and the world outside her apartment. So a routine, even a small one built around a martial arts class twice a week, and coffee with Linda on Tuesday mornings, felt like something she was holding carefully in both hands, something she was trying not to break by looking at it too directly. Tuesdays started with Linda at the coffee place, 2 blocks from the dojo, mediocre coffee, excellent muffins, exactly as advertised. Linda was an elementary school librarian who had started the class after her divorce 18 months ago, originally because her therapist had suggested it, and she had run out of things to disagree with her therapist about. She was funny in the dry, precise way of someone who had spent decades surrounded by children and had developed a very clear sense of what was genuinely worth taking seriously versus what only appeared to be. She asked Rachel questions and then waited for actual answers instead of accepting the first version. Rachel offered a quality Rachel had encountered in very few people, and which she found simultaneously disarming, and in a way she was still getting used to something close to relief. Thursdays were class, and then increasingly conversation in the parking lot afterward with Amy, and sometimes Gerald, who had developed a habit of lingering after class, that Rachel suspected had less to do with the conversation and more to do with the fact that Gerald's house was very quiet, since his wife had passed 2 years ago, and a parking lot full of people still energized from class was louder than that silence in a way that was clearly doing him good. These were not large things. They would not have registered as significant from the outside. But from where Rachel stood on the inside of a life that had felt like an empty room for over a year, they were the specific gravity that was beginning to hold things in place. She was thinking about this on a Tuesday morning sitting across from Linda with a cup of coffee she would finish approximately 3/4 of, because it was not good enough to justify finishing entirely, when Linda put down her mug and said, "Can I ask you something personal?" Rachel looked at her. "Your sister," Linda said. "Dana in Portland. Do you talk to her?" Rachel was quiet for a moment. "Not as much as I should," she said. "When was the last time?" The calculation took longer than it should have. About 3 months ago, she said. Maybe 4. Linda picked up her mug, put it down again. Is that a choice or is that... It's easier, Rachel said. Not talking. It's easier than... She stopped. Dana worries. She worries in this specific way that is very loving and also very loud. And when she worries at me, it's hard not to feel like I'm failing some kind of test I didn't know I was taking. She paused. So I call less. And then less than that. Linda nodded slowly. My mother does the same thing to me, she said. The loud worrying. She paused. It took me a long time to understand that the reason it felt like a test was because I was grading myself. She was just scared. She looked at Rachel. Dana's probably scared. Rachel looked at her coffee. Yeah, she said. She probably is. She called Dana that afternoon. She sat in her car in the parking lot of her apartment building and called her sister in Portland, and Dana picked up on the second ring in the particular way of someone who had been waiting for a call for a long time and had gotten very good at not letting that show. Hey, Dana said. Hey, Rachel said. 4 months of pause compressed into 2 seconds. How are you? Dana said. Better, Rachel said. And then before Dana could manage the hope that word generated into something careful and measured, she said, I found a thing. A place. It's a martial arts class. I've been going for 3 weeks. Dana was quiet for a moment. A martial arts class, she said. I know, Rachel said. And I'm going twice a week. I've met some people. She paused. It's helping. Dana made a sound, not a word. Just a sound that carried everything she was not allowing herself to say all the months of careful restraint. All the loud worrying she had been doing quietly at a distance, because Rachel had made it clear in the particular way Rachel made things clear that loud worrying was not something she could receive right now. A sound that was unmistakably relief. Okay, Dana said. Her voice was careful, steady. Tell me about it. So, Rachel told her not everything she skipped. The first Tuesday, skipped Jason's hand on her shoulder and the shove and the laugh, because that part was still too compressed to hand to someone who loved her without Dana's reaction requiring management. Rachel didn't have the energy for, but she told her about the class, about Thursday nights, about Linda and the mediocre coffee, about Gerald, and what he had said about third-grade classrooms, about Amy's text, about sitting at her kitchen table Thursday night without checking the locks 3 times. Dana listened without interrupting. When Rachel stopped talking, Dana said, Linda sounds real. She is, Rachel said. And the teacher Jason, he apologized. He did it publicly in front of 30 people. He did, Rachel said. Dana was quiet for a beat. That takes something, she said. To do that at 23. It does, Rachel said. Are you going to keep going? Dana said. Rachel looked through the windshield at the ordinary afternoon outside her car. 2 kids on bikes. A woman with a stroller. A sprinkler going on someone's lawn even though it was late October and didn't need water. The specific, dense, overwhelming ordinariness of a street in a world where no one was in immediate danger. Yeah, Rachel said. I'm going to keep going. She heard Dana breathe out long and slow. Good, Dana said. Rachel, good. They talked for another 30 minutes. Real conversation, the kind they used to have before everything, before the further deployments, and the silence, and the hard return, and the 14 months of careful distance. They talked about Dana's kids, about Portland's early winter, about a movie Dana had seen that she thought Rachel would hate, and was describing with detailed enthusiasm precisely because she knew Rachel would hate it. They talked about small things, human things, things that had nothing to do with survival. When they hung up, Rachel sat in the car for a moment. She was smiling. She did not immediately notice that she was smiling, which was its own kind of data. That was the Tuesday of the 3rd week. The Thursday of the 3rd week was when everything changed again. She did not see it coming. She had gotten better in 3 weeks at not anticipating crisis around every corner, at letting herself exist in the relative safety of a routine, without one eye permanently on the exit. She had been practicing. She had been building in Dr. Gwyn's language new neural architecture. And the building was real. The progress was real. Which was precisely why what happened on Thursday night hit her the way it did. Because she was less defended than she had been 3 weeks ago. And that made her both better and more vulnerable in ways she had not finished accounting for. Class started normally. 7 p.m., 40-some students. Jason at the front, moving through the warm-up with a quality of attention that had been visibly and measurably different every week since the first Tuesday, in ways his regular students had noticed and talked about in the hallway and the parking lot, in the tentative, careful language of people observing something they were afraid to jinx by naming directly. Rachel was working through a technique with Carol, who had become a constant Tuesday-Thursday presence, and who had turned out to be a recently retired ER nurse with a particular gift for remaining completely calm in situations that should not be calm, a quality Rachel recognized and respected immediately. That was when the front door of the dojo opened. She did not look up. She was focused on Carol on the specific point of the exercise on staying present. But she felt the shift in the room, the way rooms shift when something enters them that doesn't fit the current frequency. A subtle change in the collective attention, a slight reorganization of the space around a new point. Rachel had felt this shift in rooms under significantly more dangerous circumstances, and her body registered it before her mind did. A small tightening along her spine. A slight sharpening of her peripheral vision. The ancient, unkillable alertness coming online, like a system that never fully powers down. She looked up. Standing at the edge of the mat was a young man she had never seen before. Early 20s, fit in the specific way of someone who trained seriously. He was wearing expensive gear and carrying himself with a kind of deliberate confidence that was different from Jason's old confidence, less about performance, more about territory. He was looking around the room with the assessing quality of someone deciding how they ranked in a new environment. His name, Rachel would learn later, was Brandon Cole. First-degree black belt from a competition school across the city. 2 national junior championships. Trained 6 days a week. Undefeated in his last 11 competition matches. And he had come to Pacific Coast Martial Arts Academy on this particular Thursday evening because he had seen the video. The video. The one filmed by the teenage boy who had been pretending not to film on that first Tuesday. The one that had begun circulating approximately 48 hours afterward. The one that showed 7 seconds of Rachel and Jason on the mat and 30 seconds of stunned silence after. The one that had accumulated by the end of week 2 just over 400,000 views on 2 platforms. The one Rachel had not watched and had been hoping with the specific hope of someone who knows. They're hoping for something unlikely would somehow not find its way back to this room. It had found its way back to this room. Brandon located Jason and walked across the mat with the easy ownership of someone who does not ask permission in spaces he has decided he belongs in. He stopped in front of Jason and said loudly enough that the nearest 15 students could hear clearly. "Hey, I saw your video, the one with the woman." Jason looked at him steadily. "Okay," he said. "Is she here?" Brandon said. Something in Jason's posture changed. Not dramatically, but Rachel watching from across the mat saw it. The slight recalibration. The specific quality of attention that meant he was assessing rather than reacting. 3 weeks ago, Jason would have reacted. The Jason standing in front of Brandon Cole now was doing something more careful. "Why?" Jason said. Brandon smiled. "I want to train with her," he said. He said it with the ease of someone presenting an invitation rather than a demand, but the ease was surface quality. Underneath it was something harder. "That video's been going around our school. My coach showed it to me. I'm curious about the technique. I want to see how it holds up in an actual training situation." Jason looked at him for a moment. "This isn't a competition school," he said. "I know what it is," Brandon said. He looked around the room, and his gaze found Rachel and stayed there. "Hey," he said directly at her across 15 feet of mat, in a room full of people who had all at this point stopped what they were doing. "I've watched your clip probably 40 times. You want to work?" The room held its breath. Carol beside Rachel said nothing, but her hand had stopped mid-movement, frozen in the position it had been in when the shift in the room announced itself. Rachel looked at Brandon Cole. She took her time with it. Not theatrically, she was not building tension for an audience. She was doing what she always did automatically. Reading. His stance, his breathing, the way he distributed his weight, the specific quality of the confidence, where it came from, what it was built on, what was underneath it. She was reading whether this was ego or curiosity, whether this was the kind of young man who wanted to learn something, or the kind who wanted to prove something. Because those were very different situations requiring very different responses. It was both. That was the honest answer. He was genuinely curious. The video had shown him something he hadn't seen before, and part of him, the part that had put in 6-day training weeks since he was 16, recognized craft and wanted to understand it. But he was also 22, and talented, and sitting on 2 national championships, and undefeated in 11 matches. And another part of him, the louder part, had heard a story about a woman who put a black belt on the mat and had driven 40 minutes across the city to find out if the story was actually true or just a good camera angle. Rachel understood both parts of him completely. She had been in rooms with both parts of him before. Many rooms. She knew what happened when you engaged the ego and what happened when you reached past it to the curiosity. She knew that the choice after. She walked toward him across the mat, steady, not fast, not slow. The walk of someone who has made a decision and is carrying it without apology. She stopped about 6 feet from him. "What's your name?" she said. Something in his expression flickered. He had been expecting a different opener. "Brandon," he said. "Brandon," she said. "What do you actually want to learn today?" He blinked. "I want to see the technique from the video. How you—" "That's not what I asked," Rachel said. "I asked what you want to learn. Not see. Learn. Those are different things." The room was so quiet Rachel could hear someone breathing near the back wall. Brandon looked at her for a moment. The performance layer of his confidence shifted slightly. Something underneath it moved. "I want to understand," he said. And this version was more honest than the first one, less polished, how someone with no competition background can do what you did. "My coach says competition training has limits. I've heard that. I've always kind of pushed back on it because it's all I've done and I'm good at what I do. But that video—" He shook his head slightly. "I couldn't explain it. I showed it to 3 people who should be able to explain it. None of them could." Rachel nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. "That I can work with." What happened next was not what Brandon Cole had come for. And it was exactly what he needed. Rachel did not demonstrate the technique from the video. She did not put him on the mat. She did not give him what the competitive part of him had driven 40 minutes across the city to find. She asked him to do something much harder. "I want you to do the most basic warm-up drill," she said. "The first thing Jason teaches in week 1, and I want you to do it as if you have never done anything like it before. As if your body has no training and your mind has no assumptions." Brandon stared at her. "I can do that drill in my sleep." "I know," Rachel said. "That's the problem." He stared at her for another moment. Then he said, "You're serious." "I'm always serious," Rachel said. The room had completely reorganized. Nobody was training. Everyone was watching. Jason was standing to Rachel's left, with his arms at his sides, and an expression on his face that she recognized from the parking lot conversation 3 weeks ago. The expression of someone watching a lesson being taught that they could not have planned and could not have delivered themselves. Brandon Cole, national junior champion, 6-day-a-week competitor, undefeated in 11 matches, stood in the center of the mat of Pacific Coast Martial Arts Academy and did the most basic beginner drill in the curriculum. He did it badly, not because he lacked the physical ability, because truly doing it as a beginner, truly emptying the muscle memory and the competitive instinct and the deeply grooved pattern of his body's understanding of how movement worked, was something he had never tried to do. And trying it now in front of 40 people was revealing something he had not anticipated. That the very excellence of his training had built walls around his movement, as well as foundations for it. He knew how to move in the ways he had been trained to move. He did not know how to not know. He stopped after about 40 seconds. He looked at Rachel. "That was terrible," he said. No performance in his voice, just the flat recognition of someone encountering an honest assessment of themselves. "Yes," Rachel said. "Because I can't actually do it as a beginner," he said. "Because I'm not a beginner, and pretending to be one doesn't make me one." "Right," Rachel said. "So what's the point?" He said it genuinely. He actually wanted to know. "The point," Rachel said, "is that you just discovered a limit. Not a physical one, a cognitive one. A place where your training has made you so fluent in one language that you've lost access to what it felt like to learn it." She paused. "That place, that limit, is where everything interesting lives. Because the people you will eventually be most responsible for protecting or leading or teaching, they will be beginners. And if you can't access beginner, you can't reach them." Brandon was quiet for a long moment. The room was quiet with him. Then Gerald, standing near the back wall, water bottle in hand, who had spent 30 years in a third-grade classroom and knew something about the specific lesson currently being taught, said quietly but clearly, "She's right." Brandon looked at him. An older man in workout clothes who had no business being someone whose opinion he should care about in this context. And yet. "I know," Brandon said. He looked back at Rachel. "The technique in the video," he said. "Will you teach it to me?" "No," Rachel said. He blinked. "Not today," Rachel said. "Today you work with Gerald. He's going to teach you something that your competition background has probably trained out of you." She looked at Gerald. "Is that okay with you?" Gerald straightened slightly, the particular straightening of a man who has been seen. "That's fine with me," he said. Brandon looked at Gerald, then back at Rachel. "What's he going to teach me?" "Patience," Rachel said. "With someone who doesn't move the way you move, which is a skill, which you don't currently have." A beat. "Okay," Brandon said. He walked to Gerald. He stood in front of the older man with something on his face that was not quite humility. It was too new, too uncomfortable to be fully that, but was genuinely the beginning of it. The raw material from which humility gets built if you decide to build it. Gerald looked at him. "Hello?" he said simply. "Hi," Brandon said. Gerald stuck out his hand. "I'm Gerald. How long have you been training?" 6 years, Brandon said. Gerald nodded. "I've been training for 3 weeks, he said. "So you're going to have to be very patient with me." Brandon looked at him for a moment. Then something in his expression went quiet, in a way that was different from defeat and adjacent to something real. "Okay," he said. And this time the word was clean. Empty of everything it didn't need to contain. Carrying the weight of something he was actively choosing rather than reflexively agreeing to. Rachel turned away. She let them work. She found Jason beside her. "How did you know that would work?" he said. "I didn't," she said. He looked at her. "You didn't know?" "I had a strong read," she said. He came here curious. That part was real. The ego was louder, but the curiosity was real. You can work with real. She paused. You can't manufacture it, but when it's there you can reach it. Jason watched Brandon and Gerald across the mat, the 22-year-old champion, moving through a basic drill at the pace of a 55-year-old 3-week beginner, slowly and carefully with visible effort, and something in his face had gone very quiet. "You know what's strange?" Jason said. "What?" "Watching that. Watching someone with every physical advantage, every competitive credential actually slow down and be in the room with someone who has none of those things." He paused. "It's the most skilled thing I've seen in this room in 2 years." Rachel looked at him. "Yes," she said. "It is." They stood together and watched. And the room around them, 40 people who had come in tonight expecting an ordinary class, was anything but ordinary now, and everyone in it knew it, and nobody wanted to leave. 8:43 p.m. Jason called time. Brandon Cole was one of the last to leave. He had spent 45 minutes with Gerald working through beginner drills at a pace that his body found genuinely frustrating and that his mind was slowly, visibly learning to accommodate. When Jason called time, Brandon helped Gerald with his gear bag, an unremarkable gesture. A small thing, so small that most of the room didn't notice it. Rachel noticed it. Gerald noticed it too. "Thank you," Gerald said. "Thank you," Brandon said. And meant it for different reasons. And that was fine. That was exactly how it was supposed to work. Brandon stopped in front of Rachel on his way to the door. He had his gear bag over one shoulder and the expression of someone who had come in expecting to find something specific and had found something he hadn't had vocabulary for. "Same time Thursday," he said. Rachel looked at him. "This is a Tuesday-Thursday class," she said. "So yes." He nodded. He started to turn away. "Brandon," Rachel said. He stopped. "The technique you saw in this video," she said. "You'll get there, not because I'll teach it to you, because you're going to build the foundation it requires by doing exactly what you did tonight." She paused. "It takes as long as it takes." He looked at her for a moment. "Okay," he said. This time the word was quiet, clean, carrying the weight of something he was actively choosing. He walked out. The room was nearly empty now. Amy was helping Jason straighten equipment near the sidewall. Carol was pulling on her jacket and talking to Linda, who had shown up at 7:30 after a library board meeting that had run long. Gerald was at the water cooler, tired in the honest good way, the way you look when you've spent your energy on something real. Daniel came out of his office. He stood in the doorway and looked at the room, and then he looked at Rachel, and he said nothing. He just looked at her with the expression of someone whose hypothesis has been confirmed for the third time in 3 weeks and is beginning to feel very certain about something. "What?" Rachel said. "Nothing," Daniel said. "Just..." He paused. "Nothing." He went back into his office. Rachel stood in the nearly empty room for a moment. She thought about Brandon Cole watching a 7-second video 40 times. She thought about Gerald in a third-grade classroom for 30 years. She thought about Linda's mediocre coffee. She thought about Dana's voice on the phone saying, "Good, Rachel, good." She thought about what Dr. Gwynn had said 14 months ago about reconnecting. About giving her body something to do. About finding a place where she could exist without being defined by what had happened to her. She thought about this room. Then Jason crossed the mat toward her, and he was holding something in his hand, a folded piece of paper, and it took her a moment to understand what she was looking at. "I got an email today," he said, "from a veterans organization. They work with service members transitioning out. They're looking for someone to run a program, not formal therapy, not official, anything, just a physical outlet, a structured class twice a week for veterans who are struggling with the transition." He held the paper out toward her. They asked Daniel if he knew anyone. Daniel gave them my email. "I don't know why he gave them my email because I'm clearly not the right person for this." He looked at her. "But he told me to give this to you." Rachel did not take the paper immediately. She looked at it, then at Jason, then back at the paper. She thought about everything that had led to this moment. Every choice, every moment of resistance, every minute in 11 parking lots across 14 months. Every room she had almost not entered. She thought about what it meant to be handed something that looked unmistakably like a reason. She took the paper. She did not unfold it yet. She held it in her hand and stood in the middle of Pacific Coast Martial Arts Academy at 8:51 p.m. on a Thursday night, and she felt the weight of it. The specific, significant, terrifying weight of being needed in a way that was not about survival. In a way that was not about crisis. In a way that was about the long, patient daily work of helping people find their way back to themselves. The way she was finding her way back to herself. She looked at Jason. "Did Daniel say anything else?" "Yeah," Jason said. He paused, making sure he had it right. He said, and I quote, "This is what she's for." Rachel stood very still. The room was quiet around her. Outside, San Diego moved through its Thursday night. She looked down at the paper in her hand. She unfolded it. She read it: a name, a contact, an organization, name, a phone number, and 4 lines describing what the program needed. She read it twice, standing in the middle of the mat. Then she folded it back along its original crease and put it in the front pocket of her bag. The same pocket where Linda's phone number had been sitting for 3 weeks. "I need to think about it," she said finally. "Yeah," Jason said. "Of course." "That doesn't mean no," she said. "I know." He paused. "Daniel said you'd say that." Rachel looked at him. Daniel said I'd say I need to think about it. Daniel said you'd say that doesn't mean no, Jason said, which he seemed to think was significant. Rachel picked up her bag. Daniel thinks too much, she said. Daniel's right about most things, Jason said. She didn't argue with that. She drove home with the paper in her bag and the weight of what was on it sitting in the passenger seat like a person she hadn't agreed to give a ride to. She made tea. She sat at the kitchen table. She did not unfold the paper again because she had already memorized what was on it. Unfolding it would not add information. It would just be a way of performing deliberation rather than actually doing it. So she sat with the tea and did the deliberation the way she had always done her best, thinking quietly without props in the specific kind of stillness that most people found uncomfortable, and that Rachel had spent years learning to trust. The organization was called Bridgepoint, a non-profit 5 years old, founded by a former Army Ranger named Marcus Webb, who had come home from his third tour and spent 2 years being very lost before finding his way to something useful and deciding to try to shorten that timeline for other people. They ran programs in 6 cities. They were trying to start one in San Diego. They needed someone local with the right background and the right instincts to anchor a physical program, not therapy, not formal counseling, just structured physical activity, with someone who understood from the inside what the people coming through the door had been through. She already knew what she was going to do. She had probably known from the moment Jason held out the paper. But knowing and being ready were different things, and she was giving herself until morning to close the distance between them. She went to sleep at 11:15, 2 hours earlier than her average for the past 14 months. She called the number on the paper at 8:30 the next morning. A man answered on the third ring. "Bridgepoint, this is Marcus." "Marcus Webb," she said. "My name is Rachel Carter. Daniel Brooks at Pacific Coast Martial Arts gave your contact information to one of his instructors who gave it to me. I'm calling about the San Diego program." A pause. Short, but complete, the pause of someone recalibrating. "Rachel Carter," Marcus said. "Daniel mentioned you might call." Another pause. "He said you were exactly what we were looking for, and that you would take approximately 12 hours to decide to call." She heard him check something. "It's been 14 hours, so you took a little longer than he thought." Rachel sat with that for a moment. "He timed it," she said. "He timed it," Marcus confirmed. There was something in his voice, dry and warm at the same time, the voice of someone who had been through enough to find the human comedy in things without losing sight of why they mattered. "Can we meet this week? I want to tell you what we're building and what we need, and then you can tell me whether it's something you want to be part of." "Yes," Rachel said. "We can meet." They met the following Monday at a coffee shop that was not the one near the dojo neutral territory, which Rachel appreciated without having to say so, and which Marcus understood without having to be told. He was 41, built like someone who still trained hard and always would, with the specific quality of stillness that Rachel recognized immediately and completely. The stillness of someone who had learned the hard way to stop moving long enough to hear what was actually happening around them. He had 3 tours, 2 Purple Hearts, and 18 months of serious darkness after his last discharge, which he described in the flat, matter-of-fact language of someone who had done enough work on it to carry it without being crushed by it, but was not interested in performing recovery for an audience. Rachel respected that immediately. He told her about Bridgepoint, about the 6 cities, about what worked and what hadn't, about the specific population they were trying to reach. Veterans in the transition window. The first 2 years out, when the structure was gone, and the mission was gone, and the community was gone, and the body still woke up at 4 a.m., ready for something that no longer existed. "We've tried a lot of formats," he said. "Formal programming, group therapy models, peer support structures. They all have value. But the thing that consistently moves the needle for the specific people we're working with," he paused, "is physical. Something physical with someone who speaks the same language. Not someone who has read about it, someone who has been in it." Rachel looked at her coffee. "What does the program look like?" "Twice a week," he said. 2 hours each session. Structured physical activity. We've used martial arts in 3 of our other cities. It's been the most effective format with intentional conversation woven in. Not a therapy session, not a debrief. Just people moving together and talking in the way people talk when they're moving, which is different from how people talk when they're sitting across a table from someone. He looked at her. "You know what I mean." "I know exactly what you mean," Rachel said. "Daniel says you've been doing something like this informally," Marcus said. "At the dojo, working with the class in a way that goes beyond technique." Rachel considered that. "I've been sharing some things," she said carefully. "It's not the same as what you're describing." "No," Marcus said. "But it's evidence of the instinct." He looked at her steadily. "I don't need someone who has run a program before. I need someone who understands what these people are carrying and can create a space where they're allowed to put some of it down without feeling like they're being managed." He paused. "That's a very specific thing. Either you can do it or you can't." "How do you know I can?" Rachel said. Not challenging, genuine. The honest question of someone who was still on certain mornings, uncertain about the distance between what she had been and what she was capable of being now. Marcus picked up his coffee cup, put it down. "Because you called me," he said. "Because 14 hours after someone handed you a piece of paper describing people who need what you have, you picked up your phone." He looked at her. "You know what most people in your position do with that piece of paper?" Rachel waited. "They think about it for a week," he said. "They convince themselves they're not ready. They put it somewhere they can't see it, and then they feel guilty about it, and then they put it somewhere else." He held her gaze. "You called in 14 hours. That tells me everything I need to know about whether you can do this." Rachel sat with that. Then she said, "When do you want to start?" The first session of Bridgepoint, San Diego ran on a Wednesday evening, 6 weeks later in a space Daniel had cleared at Pacific Coast Martial Arts Academy. 2 hours, 7 p.m. Free of charge with no formal requirements for attendance, except that you had served and you were struggling and you were willing to show up. 7 people came to the first session. Marcus had said anything between 3 and 20 was a normal first session. 7 felt right. 7 felt like a number Rachel could hold, a number she could be genuinely present for, rather than managing from a distance. They were all different. A 26-year-old Marine named Derek, who had been out for 8 months and hadn't slept more than 4 hours consecutively since. A 38-year-old Air Force pilot who had left after 16 years and described the transition as falling out of a plane without a parachute. A 42-year-old Army medic named Corin, who had been out for 3 years and was still, she said quietly at the beginning of the session, when Rachel asked each person to say one true thing about where they were right now, still not sure she believed the war was over. Rachel heard that and felt it move through her in a way she recognized completely. She let this recognition show on her face just slightly, just enough to be visible. She did not say "me too." Not yet. Because it was the first session, and trust was something you built rather than announced. But she let the recognition be there in the quality of her attention. Because sometimes the most useful thing you could offer another person was the specific, unmistakable signal that you understood what they were carrying because you had carried it yourself. That signal delivered honestly was worth more than any technique. They moved for an hour, basic drills, simple and structured, nothing complex. Rachel had designed this session deliberately to keep the physical component accessible because the point was never the martial arts. The physical activity was just the container, the thing that gave the body something to do while the mind started to lower its guard. The thing that allowed conversation to happen in the sideways, unthreatening manner of people who were talking while doing something else, and therefore not fully facing the weight of what they were saying. It worked. By the second hour, people were talking. Not about everything. Not in the unbounded, cathartic way of a breakthrough session, and Rachel was not trying to create breakthrough sessions. She was trying to create safe rooms, which was different and slower and more durable. But in the careful testing way of people who had been alone with something for a long time, and were beginning tentatively to wonder what happened if they said part of it out loud, in a room full of people who might understand. Derek said, "I keep waking up at 4 a.m. and just lying there waiting for something, and nothing happens, and I don't know if that's better or worse than something happening." The room went very quiet. Rachel said, "What are you waiting for?" He thought about it. "Orders," he said. Or an alarm. Or someone telling me what the mission is. He looked at his hands. I've been waiting for someone to tell me what the mission is for 8 months. Rachel nodded. That wait is real, she said. And it's one of the hardest things about coming back because the answer isn't that there's a new mission waiting for you. The answer is that you have to build the mission yourself, which is something nobody trained us to do. She paused. That's part of what this room is for. You build it in here first, small. You figure out what you're for in here before you try to figure out what you're for out there. Derek looked at her. How long did it take you? She thought about a Tuesday morning in a parking lot. An engine going on and off, a canvas bag and gray workout clothes, and a dojo she had almost not walked into. I'm still figuring it out, she said honestly. But I'm figuring it out. He nodded. And something in his posture shifted. Not dramatic, not a visible unburdening, just a slight easing. The specific incremental quality of someone whose isolation has decreased by 1 degree. 1 degree was enough. 1 degree was the whole point. 3 weeks into the Bridgepoint session, something happened that Rachel had not predicted, and that rearranged something permanent in her understanding of what she was building. Jason showed up, not as a participant, as support. He had asked Rachel the week before if he could come and help manage the space handle equipment, be available for anything logistical explicitly, not as a teacher or authority figure, just as a person who wanted to contribute. Rachel had thought about it for 1 day and said yes. He sat near the back during the first session he attended. He did exactly what he said he would do, managed equipment, stayed peripheral, did not interject, did not perform, did not position himself as anything other than someone who was there to be useful. Rachel watched him out of the corner of her eye and noted the deliberateness of it, the active choice it represented for a young man who had spent years making himself the center of every room he entered. During the break between the movement portion and the conversation portion, Derek drifted toward the water cooler near where Jason was sitting, and the two of them started talking in the low, easy way of people who don't yet know each other but are in the same room for reasons that matter. Something in the quality of that conversation made Rachel stop watching them. Because it was going fine. It was going better than fine. It was two people in their ease, finding each other across the specific geography of a hard room. And that was exactly what rooms like this were supposed to produce. She looked away and gave them the privacy of not being observed. After the session, when the 7 participants had filtered out into the parking lot in the slow, unhurried way of people who were not quite ready to leave, Jason helped Rachel stack mats near the wall. They worked in silence for a few minutes, the comfortable silence of people who have been through enough together that quiet does not require filling. Derek, Jason said finally. Yeah, Rachel said. He's going to be okay, Jason said. Rachel looked at him. How do you know? Because he's asking questions, Jason said. People who are still completely lost don't ask questions, they go quiet. He paused. He asked me 3 questions in 10 minutes. About training, about routine, about how to... He stopped. He asked me how to make 4 a.m. feel like less of a verdict. Rachel stacked the last mat. What did you tell him? Jason was quiet for the moment. I told him to fill it, he said. Not with distraction, with something real. Something that matters enough to be worth being awake for. He looked at her. I told him it was still 4 a.m. for me when I started really understanding what I was doing wrong as a teacher, and that filling that time with the question of how to fix it was the first time 4 a.m. felt like a beginning instead of a punishment. Rachel looked at him for a long moment. That's good, Jason, she said. He shrugged, but the shrug was not dismissive. It was the particular gesture of someone receiving something they're not yet comfortable accepting. I had a good teacher, he said. She did not respond to that. Some things were better received in silence. The Bridgepoint sessions continued. Week 4, Week 5, Week 6. The number of participants grew 8, then 11, then 14. Not quickly, not in the explosive way of something being marketed, but in the slow word-of-mouth way of something that people find and then tell one other person about specifically and personally. Because it was not the kind of thing you posted about publicly. It was the kind of thing you said quietly to someone you trusted when you thought they might need it. Corin, the army medic, came back every week and said less each time, which Rachel understood was not regression, but the specific progress of someone who was learning to trust the room rather than perform for it. In the 6th week, Corin arrived 15 minutes early and helped Rachel set up the mats, and they worked side by side without talking. And when they were done, Corin said, "This is the first place in 3 years where I don't feel like I have to explain myself." Rachel said, "You don't." Corin nodded. She went to get water. And that was enough. That was entirely enough. Brandon Cole started coming to the Bridgepoint sessions in week 5. Not as a veteran, he had not served, but as a volunteer following a conversation with Rachel after Thursday class, in which she had somewhat to her own surprise invited him. He had a quality she had identified during his first visit. The ability, once his ego had been adequately humbled, to be genuinely present for other people. To pay attention. To stay. She had watched him with Gerald over 6 weeks of Thursday classes, and she had watched the patience he had been building in those sessions migrate into how he moved through the dojo. Generally, how he talked to newer students, how he managed the space between what he knew and what someone else was just discovering, how he was useful in the Bridgepoint room in ways she hadn't anticipated. He was young and physically capable and non-threatening in the specific way of someone who had visibly done some work on himself recently. And the male veterans in the group, who sometimes found it difficult to accept help from people they perceived as peers or authority figures, responded to him with the particular ease of someone who doesn't feel managed. In his 3rd session, Derek came in with a look Rachel recognized immediately. The 4 a.m. look. The look of someone who has had a bad week and is carrying it into the room because there is nowhere else to put it. Brandon saw it before Rachel did. He crossed the mat without fanfare and stood beside Derek and said, "Rough week." Derek looked at him. "Yeah," he said. "Okay," Brandon said. "You want to move, we can just move. You don't have to talk." Derek looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "Yeah, let's move." They spent the first 20 minutes of the session on the far side of the mat, just working, just moving, not talking. Just the specific medicine of physical presence and the knowledge that someone was there and was not going anywhere and was not requiring anything in return for their company. Rachel watched from across the room and felt something she had learned slowly and with difficulty to receive without immediately converting into action. She felt grateful. Not performing gratitude, not managing it. Just feeling it the way it was meant to be felt, as a natural response to being in a room where something good was happening, where people were choosing each other, and the choosing was real. 8 weeks into the Bridgepoint sessions, Daniel came to watch. He sat in a chair near the edge of the mat. Rachel had put out chairs for observers, anticipating that, as the program grew, people would sometimes come to see whether it was something they wanted to send someone they cared about. He watched for the full 2 hours without saying a word. When the session ended and the participants filtered out, he remained seated for a moment watching the mat. Rachel walked over to him when the room was nearly empty. He looked up at her. "Well," she said. "I was quiet for a moment." "You know what I'm going to say," he said. "Say it anyway," she said. He looked at the mat, at the space that an hour ago had held 14 people carrying things most people never had to carry. Then he looked at Rachel. "This is what you're for," he said. Exactly as he had said to Jason 8 weeks ago. Exactly the words that had been on the paper. But different now, because now they were not a prediction or a hypothesis. They were a recognition of something that had already become true. Rachel held his gaze. "Yeah," she said. "I know." 2 days later, she called Dr. Patricia Gwynn. Not for a scheduled appointment. She had been keeping her regular appointments for the past 2 months, but this call was outside the schedule. Dr. Gwynn answered with the particular alertness of a therapist who recognizes an unscheduled call and is immediately assessing what category of unscheduled it falls into. "Rachel," she said, "is everything okay?" "Yeah," Rachel said. "Everything's okay. I wanted to tell you something." A pause. "Okay," Dr. Gwynn said. "I found it," Rachel said. "The thing you said about giving my body something to do. About reconnecting." about a place where I could exist without being defined by what happened to me. She paused. I found it. Dr. Gwynn was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice had the quality of someone maintaining professional composure while feeling something personally. Tell me, she said. So Rachel told her the whole thing from the beginning. The 11 minutes in the parking lot, the canvas bag, and the gray clothes. Jason's hand on her shoulder, the shove, the laugh. The 7 seconds. Daniel's voice. The apology. Linda and the mediocre coffee. Thursday nights. Gerald and Tyler. Brandon Cole and his 40 viewings of a 7-second video. The paper with the Bridgepoint contact. Marcus Webb and his 14-hour count. The 7 people in the first session. Corin arriving early to help set up mats. Brandon and Derek on the far side of the room, just moving, no talking, just there. She talked for 37 minutes without stopping. When Rachel finished, Dr. Gwynn said, "How do you feel?" Rachel thought about it, the real version of thinking about it, not the reflexive fine she had been handing people for 14 months. She sat with the question and turned it over and looked at it from several angles and tried to find an honest answer. Like I'm here, she said finally. Like I'm actually here. Not managing being here. Not surviving being here. Just here. She paused. I don't know if I've felt that since before my first deployment. Maybe longer. Dr. Gwynn was quiet for a moment. Then she said very simply, "Good." Yeah, Rachel said. The program kept growing. By week 12, Bridgepoint San Diego had 22 regular participants and a waiting list. Marcus Webb came down from Los Angeles for a site visit and spent 2 hours watching a session. Afterward, he sat with Rachel in the parking lot in the particular way of two people who understand each other without requiring extensive explanation. We want to replicate this in 3 more cities, he said. Same model, same structure. Someone who speaks the language running the room. He looked at her. Would you be willing to help us train the facilitators for those cities? Rachel looked at him. That would take me out of San Diego for periods, she said. Yes, he said. Is that a problem? She thought about it. She thought about Linda in the Tuesday coffee, about Gerald on Thursday nights, about Corin arriving early to stack mats, about Derek, who had stopped calling it the 4 a.m. verdict and had started calling it just 4 a.m., which was a small linguistic shift that represented an enormous interior one. She thought about the fact that none of those things were going anywhere, that they were real and they were rooted, and they would be there when she came back. That she had over 4 months of small consecutive choices built something that had enough substance to hold her weight when she wasn't there. She thought about what it meant to be trusted with something larger. No, she said. It's not a problem. That same week something happened at the dojo that Rachel had not expected and could not have planned for, something that arrived sideways the way the most significant things usually do. Brandon was running the warm-up for the Thursday class. Jason had asked him 3 weeks earlier, tentatively, and with the careful framing of someone who was learning to offer things rather than assign them. And Brandon had said yes, with a quality of seriousness that was entirely different from the Brandon who had walked through the door 10 weeks ago looking for a fight he could win. I was doing it well. Not perfectly. There were moments when his competitive instincts surfaced and he moved too fast. Lost the slower students in the room, had to backtrack. But every time it happened, he caught himself. He looked at Gerald in the back row. Gerald, who had become a kind of personal compass for Brandon. In these sessions, a reminder of the pace that actual learning required, and he slowed down. Rachel was watching this when her phone buzzed in her bag. She almost ignored it. Then something made her look. It was a message from a number she didn't recognize. She almost put it away. Then she read it. My name is Derek Simmons. I got your number from Marcus Webb. I'm a veteran counselor at the VA hospital in San Diego. I work with combat veterans in transition. I've had 3 separate patients in the last 2 weeks mention something called Bridgepoint San Diego and a woman named Rachel. 2 of them specifically said it was the first thing that had made them feel like they might be okay. I would like to talk with you about a formal referral partnership if you're open to that. I think what you're doing matters. Rachel read it twice. Then she put the phone away and looked back at the mat where Brandon was working through the warm-up with 40 students, and where Gerald was in the back row, moving carefully and deliberately, and without apology, exactly at his own pace. She thought about what a formal referral partnership meant. She thought about the waiting list. She thought about the 3 more cities Marcus wanted to build programs in. She thought about all the rooms she had almost not entered, and all the people who were in their own parking lots right now, engine running, negotiating with themselves about whether to go inside. She thought, this is how it grows. She did not feel afraid. That was the thing she noticed first, the absence of the fear she would have expected 14 months ago. The fear she would have expected even 8 weeks ago, when the idea of a formal partnership with a VA hospital would have felt like something that required more of her than she had left to give. She felt steady. She felt like a person who had enough in the tank to offer something real without running empty. She felt in a way she was still getting used to, like someone who was standing on ground that held. After class, she found Jason near the equipment room. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yeah," he said. "When you started believing you were good at this," she said. "At teaching. When did it stop being about you and start being about them?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Honestly," he said. "Always," she said. "The day after the first Tuesday," he said. "I went home and I couldn't sleep, and I kept thinking about it. Not the mat, not the 7 seconds. I kept thinking about the look on Linda's face when you were talking to her, like she was being seen by someone who actually knew what they were looking at." He paused. "I thought about how many people had walked into this room for 2 years, and I had seen them as students. Not as people, just as students." He stopped. "That's when it stopped being about me. Because I realized I had been looking at everyone in this room as a reflection of my own ability to teach. Not as people who came in here with their own weight, their own reasons." He looked at her. "You taught me that, and I don't think I would have learned it any other way." Rachel looked at him carefully. "The VA called," she said. "A counselor. They want to talk about a referral partnership with Bridgepoint." Jason stared at her. "The VA hospital," he said. As in they're sending patients," she said. "As in the program is going to get bigger." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Are you ready for that?" It was the right question. It was the only question that mattered. And the fact that he asked it, that his first instinct was not excitement or congratulation, but "Are you ready? Do you have what you need? Is this okay for you?" told Rachel something about who Jason Miller was becoming that made her genuinely glad she had walked through that door 10 weeks ago. "Yes," she said. "I think I am." He nodded. "Then we'll make more space," he said simply. "Whatever you need. More time, more room. Daniel will say yes. He already knows this is what the place is supposed to be for." He paused. "I'll say yes. This room is yours, Rachel." She looked at him, this 23-year-old, who had grabbed her arm and shoved her toward the center of the mat 10 weeks ago and laughed, and who was now standing in front of her, offering her his room without calculation, without agenda, just because it was the right thing to do. "It's ours," she said. "There's a difference." He almost smiled. "Yeah," he said. "There is." She drove home that night and sat at her kitchen table and opened her laptop and wrote an email to Dr. Derek Simmons at the VA hospital. She kept it short. She said she was open to talking, that she thought a referral partnership made sense, and that she would like to meet the following week. She said that what she was building was not a treatment program. It was a room where people could put things down for a little while and figure out who they were when they weren't carrying them. She said she thought that was useful. She hoped he did too. She sent it. Then she closed the laptop and sat in the quiet of her apartment with the lights on and listened to San Diego move through its night outside her window. She thought about the 7 people who had come to the first session, and the 14 who came now, and the 22 on the roster, and the waiting list, and the 3 more cities, and the VA hospital, and all the rooms that were going to be built from this one room, from one Tuesday morning, when a quiet woman in gray workout clothes walked in and was shoved toward the center of a mat and chose to stay. She thought about what it meant to become the thing you were afraid to be. She thought about Derek saying just 4 a.m. now. Just 4 a.m., like a time of day that happened to be early. Like something ordinary. like something you lived with rather than endured. She thought about Corin arriving early to set up mats without being asked, moving through the space like someone who belonged in it, because she did, because this room was hers now too. She thought about Brandon and Gerald on the far side of the mat, just moving, just being there. She thought about Linda's mediocre coffee, and Amy's late-night text, and Dana's voice saying good. Rachel, good with the particular relief of someone who had been holding their breath for a very long time. She sat at her kitchen table, and she was not afraid. And the not being afraid was not the absence of the fear that had been there for 14 months. It was something else. It was what was left when you finally stopped fighting the thing you were and started being it instead. It was the specific hard-won, fragile, durable thing that lived on the other side of all those parking lots, and all those engines going on and off, and all those rooms she had almost not entered. It was the ground. She had found the ground. And now she was going to help other people find it too. Dr. Derek Simmons was not what Rachel had expected. She had built a picture of him in her mind over the 3 days between his text and their meeting. Her meeting, a picture assembled from every VA administrator and military-adjacent bureaucrat she had encountered in the past 14 months. Someone careful, someone process-driven, someone who would spend 45 minutes explaining referral protocols before asking a single question about what was actually happening in the room. She was wrong about all of it. How was 44 former Air Force II tours as a flight surgeon before transitioning into clinical psychology. He walked into the coffee shop, not the one near the dojo, not the mediocre coffee place with Linda. A third-place neutral ground again, which Rachel noted and appreciated, and he sat down across from her and said before the server had even come to the table, "Tell me what you said to Derek Simmons at the first session. The thing about building the mission yourself." Rachel looked at him. "How do you know what I said?" "Because Derek told me," he said. "Word for word. He's repeated it 4 times in our sessions." He paused. "In 12 years of clinical work, I have never had a patient repeat something word for word 4 times. I want to understand why that particular thing landed the way it did." Rachel looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Because I wasn't trying to help him. I was just telling him the truth." Simmons stared at her. "Say that again." "I wasn't trying to help him," she said. "I was just telling him what I actually believe. That the answer isn't a new mission waiting for you. That you have to build it yourself. I said it because it's true, not because I thought it would land." She paused. People can tell the difference. They've been told things designed to help them for months or years. When someone says something because it's simply true, it sounds different. It feels different in the body. Simmons sat back in his chair. He looked at her the way she had seen Daniel look at her, not with surprise, but with a very specific recognition. The look of someone encountering something they already understood theoretically, but had not seen in this form before. "I want to send you 8 people," he said, "in the next 30 days. Rachel shook her head. 4, she said. 30 days. We do this right or we don't do it. 4, he said. Then, why 4? "Because I'm not running an intake pipeline," she said. "I'm building a room, and a room needs the right number of people in it, or it stops being a room and becomes a waiting area. And people who have spent a year feeling like they're waiting for their life to start do not need another waiting area." Simmons was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Okay, 4. He reached into the folder he had brought and slid a single page across the table. Not a contract, not a memorandum of understanding, just a typed list of 4 names with brief notes beside each. He watched her read it. She read it carefully, the way she had read everything in the field, not for the information on the surface, but for what was underneath it. The notes were clinical and spare, but she had learned to read clinical and spare. She could see the shape of each person in 4 lines of text. The Marine who had stopped leaving his apartment. The Navy corpsman who had gained 60 pounds in 18 months and described it to Simmons as not being able to feel the edges of himself anymore. The female soldier who had left after 10 years and was in Simmons's restrained clinical language struggling to locate purpose outside of a command structure. She knew all of these people. Not these specific people. But she knew them. She had been them in different proportions and different seasons. She looked up from the page. "I'll take all 4, she said. but I need you to do something first. What? Stop calling it a referral, she said. When you talk to them about it, don't say I'm referring you to a program. Say I know someone you should meet. There's a difference. Simmons looked at her for a long moment. There's a difference, he said slowly, like he was testing the weight of it. Yes, Rachel said. A referral is something that happens to you. Meeting someone is something you do. The people you're sending me have had enough things happen to them. She held his gaze. They need to make a choice. Give them the choice. Something shifted in Simmons's expression. Not concession agreement. The look of someone who has been thinking something they hadn't found the exact words for and just heard them spoken aloud. Okay, he said. I know someone you should meet. The 4 people arrived at the next Bridgepoint session, one by one, over the course of the first 15 minutes, with the particular energy of people who had been told enough to be curious, but not enough to feel managed. Rachel watched each of them walk in and do what everyone did when they first walked into this room. Look for the exits, assess the threat level, measure the other people against whatever internal scale they carried. She let them look. She didn't rush it. She had learned that the looking was part of the process, that letting people orient themselves without interference was its own form of respect. That the moment you hurried someone past their own assessment of a space was the moment you lost their trust. Not dramatically, not in any way they could name, but in the quiet cellular way that mattered most. The Navy corpsman was the one she watched most carefully. His name was Paul. He was 31. He was a big man wide across the shoulders, and he carried his weight the way people carry things they're ashamed of, not on the outside, but in the particular quality of how he moved, like he was taking up more space than he had the right to. He sat in a chair on the edge of the mat while people filtered in and did not introduce himself to anyone. He held his water bottle in both hands and looked at the floor between his feet. When Rachel asked everyone to say one true thing about where they were right now, Paul was the last to speak. He waited so long that Rachel thought he might not say anything at all. Then he said, still looking at the floor, I don't recognize myself. The room was very quiet. In the mirror, he said, or anywhere. I look at myself and I can't find the person who used to be there. He paused. I've been told that's grief. I don't know if that's the right word. I just know that I'm looking for something I can't find, and I'm not sure it's still there to find. Rachel looked at him for a long moment. It's still there, she said. He looked up. You can't know that, he said, not hostile honest, the honest pushback of someone who has heard too many assurances and needed them to mean something. You're right, Rachel said. I can't know that about you specifically. What I know is that the fact that you came here tonight means something is still pulling you toward something. Something in you is still reaching. She paused. That's not nothing. That's actually quite a lot. Paul looked at her for a moment. Then he looked back at the floor. But something in his posture had shifted just slightly, just enough. That was enough. The session that night was different from any previous session, not in its structure, which was the same, but in its weight. 14 people in the room, now including the 4 new arrivals, and the presence of 4 people at the beginning of a process that the others were further along in, created something Rachel hadn't anticipated. The older participants, Derek, Corin, the others, who had been coming for weeks, began without being asked to make space for the new ones. Not explaining, not instructing, just making space. Moving naturally into the role of people who knew the room and were letting others find it. Derek sat down beside Paul during the conversation portion of the session. They didn't talk at first. They just sat in the particular companionable silence of 2 people who understood that silence was sometimes more accurate than words. Then Derek said quietly, not looking at Paul, "The 4 a.m. thing." Paul glanced at him. "Does it happen to you?" Derek said. 3 a.m., Paul said. Derek nodded. "Yeah," he said. "It moves around." A pause. "It gets less loud. I can't promise it goes away, but it gets less loud." Paul was quiet for a moment. "How?" he said. "Fill it," Derek said. "Not with noise, with something real." He paused. "I'm still figuring out what real is for me. But the figuring out is better than the waiting. That's the part she told me that I couldn't stop thinking about." He nodded toward Rachel across the room. You can't wait for someone to hand you the mission. You have to build it yourself, and you build it in here first. Paul looked at Derek. Then he looked at Rachel across the room. And Rachel, who had not been trying to listen to this conversation, who had been talking to Corin on the other side of the mat, felt the shift. The way she always felt shifts in the quality of the air, in the subtle reorganization of the room's attention. And she looked up. Paul was looking at her. It was a look she had seen before on Derek at the first session on Corin in week 2 on Brandon Cole, the night he had done the beginner drill badly and learned something true about himself. It was the look of someone whose isolation has just decreased by a single degree. The look of someone who has just learned not from being told, but from being in the room with someone else who is carrying the same thing, that they are not the only one. 1 degree. That was the whole work. That was the entire point. After the session, Rachel found Jason helping Brandon stack mats in the corner. The two of them had developed a rhythm in these sessions that she had been quietly observing for weeks. A real one, not performed, built from genuine mutual respect that had grown out of Brandon's weeks of working with Gerald and Jason's weeks of learning to listen before he spoke. They moved together the way people move when they trust each other's sense of space. Something happened tonight, Jason said without looking up from the mat he was folding. With the new people. Yeah, Rachel said. Derek, Jason said. Sitting with the new guy. Paul, Rachel said. I watched that, Jason said, for about 2 minutes, and I thought. He stopped. He set the mat down. He turned to face her. I thought, this is what it's actually for. Not the belt, not the technique, not any of the things I spent 2 years thinking it was for. He paused. This is it. 2 people sitting on a mat talking about 3 a.m. because someone created a room where that was allowed. Rachel looked at him. You created the room, she said. This is your space. You told me what it was for, he said. There's a difference. She held his gaze. Yeah, she said. There is. 2 weeks later, the call came from Marcus Webb that Rachel had been both anticipating and not quite ready for. She was at Tuesday Coffee with Linda when her phone buzzed on the table between them. She looked at the screen. Marcus. She held up one finger to Linda. I need to take this. Linda waved her off graciously. Go, she said. Rachel stepped outside. Marcus. We've got a problem, Marcus said. His voice was controlled, but underneath the control, she heard the specific tension of someone managing something unexpected. The facilitator we hired for the Portland program just pulled out. Personal reasons, it's legitimate, I'm not questioning it. But we open in 3 weeks, and we have nothing. Rachel was quiet. I need you in Portland for 2 weeks, Marcus said. I know what I'm asking. I know what you've built in San Diego. I know what interrupting it costs. What does 2 weeks in Portland look like? She said. You train the local facilitator. We have someone, she's good. She just needs someone to run alongside her for the first 2 sessions. Get the room established. Come back. He paused. 2 weeks. In and out. Rachel thought about Bridgepoint, San Diego. She thought about Paul, who had been coming for 2 weeks and was still in the process of deciding whether to trust the room. She thought about Corin, who arrived early every week to set up mats. She thought about Derek, who was teaching other people about 4 a.m. She thought about whether any of this was fragile enough to break if she stepped away for 2 weeks. She realized it wasn't. She realized in the specific way that realizations hit when you've been holding a question without knowing you were holding it, that she had spent 4 months building something that did not depend on her being the only person holding it up. That was the point. That had always been the point. A room that needed her there every minute was not a room. It was a dependency. And she had been careful, deliberately, painstakingly careful not to build a dependency. She had built a room. Okay, she said. I'll go to Portland. A pause on Marcus's end. Short, but she heard the relief in it. Thank you, he said. I'll send you the details tonight. She went back inside. Linda was waiting with the expression of someone who has been watching a person take a phone call and has correctly identified its approximate weight. Portland, Linda said. Rachel looked at her. How did you? Your face, Linda said simply. What happened? Rachel told her. Linda listened the way she always listened, fully, without interrupting, without beginning to formulate her response, before Rachel had finished speaking. When Rachel stopped, Linda wrapped both hands around her coffee cup and was quiet for a moment. "Are you scared?" Linda said. Rachel thought about it honestly. "About Portland, no," she said. "About leaving here for 2 weeks," she paused. "Not scared, just aware of what I'm leaving." "We'll be here when you get back," Linda said. "Carol's going to keep coming. Gerald's going to keep coming. Derek and Corin are going to keep coming." She paused. "And for what it's worth, the fact that you built something that will still be standing when you walk back through that door. That's not nothing, Rachel. That's actually the whole thing." Rachel looked at her across the table. "When did you get this wise?" she said. Linda smiled. "I've been spending a lot of Tuesday mornings with someone who taught me to pay attention," she said. "It rubs off." She told Jason that Thursday. He took it the way he took most things now, listening first, responding after, not rushing to fill the space between her sentences. "2 weeks," he said. "2 weeks," she said. "Can you cover the Bridgepoint sessions?" "Brandon and I can manage," he said without hesitation. Then, "Rachel." She looked at him. "When you come back," he said, "I want to talk to you about something. Not now, not before you leave, but when you come back." "What is it?" she said. He shook his head. "When you come back," he said, "go to Portland. Do what you need to do. Come back, and then I want to talk." She studied his face. He was not anxious. He was not building to something uncomfortable. He looked like someone who had made a decision and was giving it the appropriate amount of space before speaking it out loud. "Okay," she said. She left for Portland on a Sunday. Dana picked her up from the airport, which was not something Rachel had arranged or expected. Marcus had sent a car, but Dana had called 3 days before and said, "I know you have a car. I'm picking you up anyway," in a tone that did not invite negotiation. Dana was 43 years older than Rachel and looked like a softer version of the same person, same bone structure, same watchful quality around the eyes, but where Rachel carried her awareness, like armor, Dana carried hers, like memory. Like someone who had spent years paying attention and kept everything she'd noticed close to her chest, out of love. They drove through Portland's early February gray without speaking for the first 10 minutes. Not the old silence, the careful, managed silence of two sisters navigating 14 months of distance. This was different. This was the silence of people who had recently found their way back to each other and were comfortable enough in the rediscovered space to not fill it immediately. Dana broke it first. "How's Jason?" she said. Rachel glanced at her. "He's good," she said. "He's changed a lot." "You sound surprised," Dana said. "I'm not surprised," Rachel said. She paused. "It's different watching someone actually change, actually do it. Not talk about it, not announce it, just do it quietly day after day in how they treat people and how they listen and what they notice." She paused again. "It's one of the better things I've seen in a long time." Dana drove for a moment. And Daniel, still watching everything from behind a frosted glass window and acting like he wasn't, Rachel said. Dana laughed a real laugh, short and surprised, the same laugh Rachel had. "I'm so glad you found that place," Dana said. And the simplicity, the complete uncomplicated gladness in her voice landed in Rachel's chest in a way she didn't try to manage. "Me too," Rachel said. The Portland program was in a community center gym on the east side of the city. The facility Marcus had found was a woman named Simone Park. 36 former Army Ranger support had been out for 4 years and had done enough of her own work to be genuinely useful to other people, rather than inadvertently making the room about her own process. She was sharp and observant, and had the particular quality of stillness that Rachel was learning to recognize as the common denominator in people who were good at this. Not the stillness of passivity, but the stillness of someone who was very actively listening. They met the day before the first session. They talked for 3 hours. Not about protocols or frameworks or session structures, about the specific human thing that this work required. About what it meant to be in a room with people who were holding things they didn't have language for yet. About how to create silence that felt like safety rather than pressure. About when to speak and when to let the room do its own work. Simone listened in the particular way of someone taking information they plan to actually use. She asked exactly the right questions. She pushed back in 2 places, and both pushbacks were correct, and Rachel said so. "You don't need 2 weeks," Simone said at the end of the conversation. "You could run 1 session with me and I'd have it." Rachel looked at her. "Maybe," she said, "but I'm going to stay 2 weeks anyway." "Why?" "Because the first session is the easy part," Rachel said. "The second session is when people start deciding whether to trust the room. That's the part I want to be there for." Simone nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. 2 weeks. The first Portland session had 9 people. Rachel stayed at the edge of the room and let Simone lead, interjecting twice, both times with a single sentence, both times at precisely the moment the conversation needed weight. Simone noticed both interjections and learned from them in real time, which Rachel recognized as a quality that could not be taught and was exactly why Marcus had found the right person. After the session, one of the participants, a woman named Grace, 28, former Marine, who had spent the entire session with her arms crossed and her jaw set, and her eyes moving around the room in the way Rachel recognized as someone who was present and simultaneously prepared to leave at any moment, stopped in front of Rachel on her way out. "You're not the regular one," Grace said. "No," Rachel said. "I'm just here for the start." "Why?" Grace said. "Because somebody did it for me," Rachel said. "Showed up at the start. Made sure the room was right before they left." Grace looked at her for a moment. "Was it?" she said. "Right. It took me 11 minutes in a parking lot to decide to walk in," Rachel said. "And then I had to be shoved toward the center of the mat before I stopped pretending to be a beginner." She paused. "But yeah, it was right. Eventually." Grace stared at her. "Someone shoved you away, long story," Rachel said. Grace uncrossed her arms, just slightly, just enough. "Will you be at the next one?" she said. "Yes," Rachel said. "I'll be at the next one." The second session had 12 people. Grace came back. She sat with her arms at her sides this time. On the flight home, Rachel sat with her phone in her hand and Dana's voice in her ear saying, "Call me when you land," and the particular weight of 2 weeks away from everything she had built. Not the anxious weight of absence, but the solid weight of something she had been carrying for a long time, that she now knew how to set down and pick back up again. She texted Jason when she landed. "Back. Tomorrow." He replied in under a minute. "Tuesday coffee first. I'll be there." She stared at that for a moment. "Jason Miller at Tuesday mediocre coffee." She typed back, "Linda's going to have opinions about your latte order." He replied, "I'll survive." She smiled. She put her phone away. She got her bag. She went home. The Tuesday morning was gray and damp, and Linda was already at the corner table with 2 cups when Rachel walked in, and she stood up and hugged Rachel in the straightforward way of someone who had missed a person and was not pretending otherwise. And Rachel stood in it for a moment and let herself be held, which was something she had not been able to do for a very long time, and was learning to do again, one slow practice at a time. Jason arrived 7 minutes late, slightly out of breath, in the way of someone who had underestimated traffic and refused to admit it. He sat down. Linda slid a cup toward him. He looked at it. "What is this?" he said. "Coffee," Linda said. "The mediocre kind. You'll learn to love it." He took a sip. His expression was diplomatic. "How was Portland?" he asked Rachel. "Good," she said. "Really good. Simone is excellent. She's going to do something real there." "And Grace," he said. Rachel looked at him. "I didn't tell you about Grace." "Marcus debriefed me," Jason said. "He said you had a conversation with a participant after the first session that he wanted to know about. I asked him what it was, and he said you'd tell me yourself." He paused. "So, Grace." Rachel told him about Grace in the parking lot, about arms crossed and jaw set, and the 11 minutes and the shove. Jason listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You told her about the shove," he said. "Yes," Rachel said. He looked at his coffee cup. Something moved across his face, not shame, not anymore. The shame had been converted into something more useful months ago. something closer to gratitude. The specific gratitude of someone who has been changed by a hard thing and is beginning to understand that the hard thing was necessary. "I'm glad it happened," he said quietly. "I'm not glad I did it. I'm glad it happened. Because if it hadn't—" He stopped. "You wouldn't have been there, in that room in Portland, telling Grace about 11 minutes in a parking lot." He paused. "That's a strange kind of math, but it's true." Rachel looked at him. "Yeah," she said. "It is." Linda was watching both of them with the expression of someone who is witnessing something and has the good sense not to interrupt it. "Okay," Jason said. "I need to tell you something." He put his cup down. He straightened slightly in his chair. "I've been talking to a university in the area, San Diego State. They have a kinesiology program with a wellness track. They're developing a course on physical intervention in mental health recovery." He paused. "They want to feature Bridgepoint San Diego as a case study, and they want you to guest lecture." Rachel stared at him. "How did they know about Bridgepoint?" "Simmons," Jason said. "Dr. Simmons from the VA. He presented a paper last month at a conference. He cited the program, by name, with your name." He held her gaze. "Rachel, it's working. It's working so well that people are starting to study it." The silence at the table was the particular silence of a large thing being absorbed. Linda broke it. "Say something," she said to Rachel. Rachel looked at her, then at Jason. "I'm not an academic," she said. "You don't have to be," Jason said. "They don't want an academic. They want someone who has done this from the inside, someone who built it from nothing because nothing else existed." He paused. "Someone who sat in a parking lot for 11 minutes and then walked in anyway." Rachel looked at the table. She thought about the first Tuesday, about the canvas bag and the gray clothes and the dojo she had almost not walked into. She thought about how far that single step had traveled from one room in San Diego to a VA referral partnership to Portland to a university that was now studying what she had built from a conversation and a piece of paper and a leap of faith she had taken in a parking lot when she was running out of reasons not to. She thought about what it meant when a thing you built started to teach people things without you having to be in the room. She thought about 22 veterans in San Diego and 12 in Portland and 3 more cities coming and a waiting list and a university and a VA hospital and all the rooms that were going to be built from this one room from one Tuesday morning when she had been shoved toward the center of a mat and chosen to stay. She looked up. "When?" she said. Jason almost smiled. "Next semester," he said. "March." "Okay," Rachel said. "Okay," he said. Linda picked up her coffee cup. "To mediocre coffee," she said. Rachel picked up hers. "And the rooms we almost didn't walk into," she said. They drank. And outside. San Diego moved through its ordinary Tuesday morning, completely unaware that in a corner table at a coffee shop 2 blocks from a dojo, 3 people were sitting with their cups raised to the unremarkable, extraordinary, necessary fact of having showed up. March came in cold and bright, the kind of morning that felt like an argument against staying indoors. And Rachel Carter stood outside the auditorium at San Diego State University for 4 minutes before walking in. Not 11. 4. She had made progress. The lecture hall held 212 students, which she knew because she had asked Marcus the night before, and he had told her in the calm, matter-of-fact way he delivered information he knew might be difficult to receive. She had said nothing to that. She had hung up and sat at her kitchen table and breathed in the deliberate way Dr. Gwynn had taught her, the way that told her nervous system the crisis was over, that the ground was solid, that she was okay. Except this was not a crisis. That was what she kept reminding herself. A crisis was a hallway in a country she couldn't name, with a man who outweighed her by 60 pounds. A lecture hall in San Diego with 212 kinesiology students was not a crisis. It just felt enormous in a way she was still learning to distinguish from danger. She walked in. Jason was already there, sitting in the 3rd row with Brandon beside him, both of them looking slightly out of place in an academic setting in the specific way of people who had spent the last 6 months in a dojo rather than a classroom. Jason had a notepad. He was the only person in the 3rd row with a notepad. Rachel noticed this and felt something warm move through her chest. Dr. Elaine Cho, the kinesiology professor who had arranged the lecture, met her at the side door. She was 52, efficient, and had the particular directness of someone who respected other people's time because she understood the value of her own. 50 minutes, she said. Q&A after. No slides required. I told them you'd just talk. Is that okay? That's okay, Rachel said. Good. Dr. Cho paused. Dr. Simmons sent me your intake notes from the first Bridgepoint session. The framework you used. She looked at Rachel. You developed that yourself. No template. There was no template, Rachel said. I just thought about what I would have needed when I came home. Dr. Cho was quiet for a beat. That's what I'm going to tell them before you start, she said. That sometimes the most important work comes from someone who just thought about what they would have needed. She paused. Is that okay with you? Yes, Rachel said. That's okay. She walked to the front of the room. 212 faces looked at her. Young faces, mostly early 20s. Notebooks opened the particular alertness of students who had been told this was worth paying attention to. She recognized some of what she saw in them. The posturing, the performance of attentiveness designed to be observed, the handful who were genuinely curious and weren't performing anything. She had learned to find those faces first, not because the others didn't matter, but because the genuinely curious ones set the temperature of the room, and if you could reach them, the room usually followed. She found 3 in the front rows. She looked at them, and she began. I'm going to tell you about a Tuesday morning in October, she said. I sat in a parking lot for 11 minutes trying to decide whether to walk into a martial arts class. I turned the engine on and off twice. I was 34 years old. I had 11 years of Navy service behind me, including time attached to SEAL operations in combat zones. And I could not make myself walk through the front door of a dojo in suburban San Diego. The room was quiet. That's not a story about weakness, she said. That's a story about what happens to the human body and the human mind when they've been operating in survival mode for so long that they've forgotten how to do anything else. And it's the story that Bridgepoint San Diego is built on. Because every single person who has walked through that door in the past 5 months has sat in their own version of that parking lot. Some of them for 11 minutes. Some of them for 11 months. She talked for 47 minutes. She did not use notes. She talked about the architecture of trust, how it was built, and how it collapsed, and how you rebuilt it. Not through declarations, but through the patient, repetitive experience of being in a room where someone showed up again and again and nothing bad happened. She talked about the difference between a program and a room. She talked about what she had learned from a 55-year-old retired third-grade teacher named Gerald, about the relationship between patience and learning. She talked about Derek and 4 a.m. She talked about Corin arriving early to stack mats. She did not talk about the 7 seconds on the mat. That was still hers. When she stopped, the room was quiet for a full 3 seconds before the first hand went up. The student was in the back row, a young man, maybe 21, who had been leaning forward for the last 20 minutes in the specific posture of someone who had something pressing they needed to ask. You said you built the program from what you would have needed when you came home, he said. What did you need that you didn't get? Rachel looked at him. Someone who had been there, she said. Not someone who had studied people who had been there. Not someone who had read the research and understood the frameworks. Someone who had actually been in it and come out the other side, and could say without performing it, without making it into a lesson. This is hard, and I know it's hard because I've been where you are, and I'm still here. She paused. That's not a clinical intervention. It's a human one. And sometimes the human one is the one that opens the door. Another hand. A young woman in the middle section. Do you think what you built can be replicated, or is it specific to you, to your particular background and experience? Rachel considered this. It was the right question. It was the question she had asked herself 100 times in the past 5 months. I think the specific content of the experience can't be replicated, she said. But the principle can. The principle is find someone who has been through the relevant thing, who has done enough of their own work to be genuinely useful to other people, rather than inadvertently making the room about themselves and create a space where they can be honest without being clinical. She paused. The hard part isn't the structure. The structure is simple. The hard part is finding people who are far enough along their own road to see the road instead of the ditch they just climbed out of. A third hand, closer to the front. What changed for you? The student said. Not the program, you. What changed? Rachel stood with that question for a moment. The room waited. She had learned that this room, any room, every room would wait if you didn't rush it. I stopped managing being alive, she said finally. I had been alive but treating it like a logistical problem to be solved. Getting through each day accounting for the exits, scanning for threats in rooms that didn't have any. And at some point gradually, and then all at once, the way those things happen, I stopped doing that, and started just being in the room. She paused. That's not a therapeutic outcome. That's not a clinical milestone. That's just a person finding their way back to themselves. And it's the whole point of everything. The applause started before she had finished the last sentence. Not the polite, obligatory applause of a class fulfilling a social expectation. Something more genuine than that. The kind that starts in one part of a room and moves through it because the people around you are feeling something, and you're feeling it too, and suddenly your hands are doing something without your brain having approved it first. Rachel stood at the front of the room and received it. She did not minimize it. She did not deflect it. She let it land the way she was learning to let things land in open hands, not closed ones, because the closing was what broke them. Dr. Cho appeared at her elbow when the room had settled. That was... She stopped. Started again. I've had 100 guest lecturers in this room, she said. That was different. Different how? Rachel said. The room believed you, Dr. Cho said simply. Not because you had credentials or a framework or a study to cite. Because you told them the truth, and they could feel that it was the truth. She paused. That's rare. That's very rare. Jason was waiting by the side door. Brandon had gone ahead. He had a Thursday class to prepare for a new group of beginners who would walk in for the first time tonight, not knowing what they were walking into. The way Rachel had not known the way, none of them had known, and Brandon would be there to let them find the room at their own pace and not rush them past their own assessment of it. Rachel had watched Brandon become this person over 6 months. It was one of the best things she had seen. How do you feel? Jason said. Like I talked for 47 minutes to 200 people about things I've only ever said in small rooms, she said. Yeah, he said. How does that feel? She thought about it. Like something that was mine got a little bigger, she said. And it didn't get smaller in the process, it just got bigger. Jason nodded slowly. That's the right way to put it, he said. They walked out of the building into the March morning. Jason had his hands in his jacket pockets and the expression of someone who has been carrying something for a while and has decided the time has come to put it down. I need to tell you something, he said. You said that before Portland, Rachel said. You said wait until you come back. You came back, he said. I came back, she said. Tell me. He stopped walking. She stopped with him. They stood on the path outside the auditorium while students moved around them in both directions. And Jason looked at the middle distance for a moment, the way he did when he was finding the exact words rather than just the approximate ones. I've been offered a position, he said, at a new facility in Seattle. A performance and wellness center, serious operation, well-funded, working with first responders and veterans alongside elite athletes. They want a head of martial arts programming. He paused. It's a significant opportunity. The kind of thing I would have taken without a second thought 2 years ago because it would have looked good and paid well and put me in front of a bigger audience. He paused again. But I've been sitting with it for 3 weeks and I can't figure out if I want to go because it's genuinely the right next thing or because some part of me is still chasing the version of myself I was before. He stopped. Before you walked into my class. Rachel looked at him. What does your gut say? My gut says stay, he said. My gut says the work that's happening here, the Bridgepoint sessions, the class, what you're building, that I'm part of something here that I won't find somewhere else. That I'm in the middle of learning something I need to finish learning before I go anywhere. He looked at her. But I don't trust my gut yet. Not completely. I've been wrong about what I thought I knew too many times in the past 6 months to trust it automatically. Rachel was quiet for a moment. That's the most honest thing you've said to me, she said. That you don't trust your gut yet. He looked at her. Is that good or bad? It's good, she said. It means you're actually thinking instead of reacting. She paused. What would you lose if you went? This, he said simply. All of this. What would you gain? He thought about it. A bigger platform. More resources. A chance to take something I've been learning here and apply it somewhere that needs it. Does Seattle need it more than San Diego does? She said. He was quiet. No, he said. But Seattle doesn't have you. Rachel looked at him steadily. Jason, she said. You don't need me anymore. You haven't for a while. You need to know that. He stared at her. That's not... It's true, she said. Look at what you did while I was in Portland. You and Brandon ran those sessions. Derek made progress. Paul came back for the third time. Corin brought someone new. She held his gaze. I didn't do that. You did. The room held without me because you built it to hold. She paused. If you go to Seattle and you take what you've learned here, the real version, not the version you would have taken 2 years ago, you'll build another room there. And it'll hold too. Jason looked at her for a long moment. Something was happening on his face, not the rapid recalibration she had seen on that first Tuesday when the world had demonstrated it was larger than his map of it. Something slower. Something that was taking its time, which was itself the evidence that he had changed. I'm going to stay, he said. I know, Rachel said. You knew before I did, he said. I had a sense, she said. And she almost smiled. He laughed the real laugh, the one she had heard for the first time on that first Tuesday when Devon asked, What do we do now? And the room had cracked open. The laugh that had nothing to do with an audience. Daniel's going to say he knew too, Jason said. Daniel knows everything, Rachel said. It's exhausting. They walked back toward the parking lot, and the March morning was still cold and still bright, and the trees along the path were doing what trees did in early spring, not blooming yet, but getting ready to, which was its own kind of thing, its own kind of hope. That Thursday evening, Rachel walked into Pacific Coast Martial Arts Academy for what she realized standing in the doorway with her canvas bag over her shoulder was the 6-month anniversary of the first Tuesday. She had not planned this realization. It arrived the way the important ones did, without announcement, without fanfare, just a quiet certainty settling into the chest. 6 months. She walked through the double doors, and the room was exactly as it had been every Tuesday and Thursday for 6 months. The sound of shoes on rubber, the warm-up energy, 40-some people of various ages and backgrounds and levels of expertise doing the specific, ordinary, necessary work of showing up. Carol was near the middle working through a technique with a focus that had developed from careful and tentative 6 months ago into something fluid and precise. Gerald was in the back row, moving with the deliberate patience that had become his signature, the thing newer students watched and unconsciously calibrated themselves against without realizing they were doing it. Derek was leading a group of 3 near the sidewall, showing them something, his hands moving through the demonstration with the ease of someone who had found slowly and through difficulty a relationship with his own body that felt like his again. He had been coming for 5 months. He had not missed a single session. He was one of the constants, now the kind of person a room builds itself around without appointing. Corin was already there. She was always already there. She had set up the mats for the Bridgepoint portion of the evening and was standing near the water station talking to Paul, who had been coming for 2 months, and was... Rachel noted with the particular attention she gave to things she did not want to jinx by looking at directly standing differently than he had at the first session. Not dramatically differently, but the weight he had been carrying in his posture, the weight of a man who felt he was taking up more space than he had the right to, had shifted. Not gone, but shifted. He stood like someone who had begun tentatively and without announcement to believe he was allowed to be where he was. Brandon saw her walk in and cross the mat toward her with the easy, purposeful stride of someone who had things to report. 17 tonight, he said, for the Bridgepoint session. Simmons sent 2 new referrals this week. I know, Rachel said. He texted me. Grace called from Portland, Brandon said. She wants to know if she can zoom into the session. She has someone she wants to show it to. Rachel stopped. Grace wants to show someone the session. A friend, Brandon said. Army, just got out. Grace said she's been trying to explain Bridgepoint to her for 3 weeks and finally said, forget it, just watch. Rachel thought about Grace in that parking lot in Portland. Arms crossed, jaw-set eyes moving around the room, measuring exits. Grace calling from Portland to show a friend what a room could look like when it was built right. Set it up, Rachel said. Brandon nodded and moved off to handle it. Which was the thing about Brandon, he handled things now. He had walked into this room 6 months ago looking for a fight he could win, and he had stayed to build something, and somewhere in the building, he had become someone who handled things without being asked and did not need to be noticed doing it. Rachel thought this was one of the more remarkable transformations she had witnessed in 6 months, and she had witnessed several. Daniel came out of his office at 7:15. He stood in the doorway and looked at the room the way he always looked at the room, with that gathering patient attention that Rachel had come to understand was the way Daniel Brooks expressed love. He was not a man who said things easily or often. He expressed himself in what he built and what he watched and what he was willing to be in a room for. He looked at Rachel. She walked to him. They stood together at the edge of the mat, and the room moved and breathed around them, and for a moment, neither of them said anything because neither of them needed to. The university called me this morning, Daniel said finally. Dr. Cho. She wants to formalize the relationship, use the dojo as a practicum site for graduate students in the wellness track. Supervised hours with the Bridgepoint sessions. Rachel looked at him. What did you say? I said I'd talk to you, he said. And yes, he said. Obviously yes. Rachel nodded slowly. She thought about what this room had been 6 months ago. What it had looked like from the outside, a martial arts academy in suburban San Diego, modest in scale with a young instructor who wore his black belt like a crown, and an owner who watched everything through frosted glass and waited for truth to do its own work. She thought about what it was now, what it had become without anyone deciding to make it become something. Just through the patient accumulation of people choosing to show up, and the specific alchemy that happened when enough people made that choice in the same space over enough time. Daniel, she said. Yeah, he said. Why did you let me sit in that parking lot for 11 minutes, she said. On the first Tuesday, before I came in, you could see me from your office window. I know you could. He was quiet for a moment. I could see you, he said. Why didn't you come out, she said. You said you would have come after me if I'd left. Why did you wait? He turned to look at her directly. Because you needed to make the choice, he said. Not be helped into it. Not be encouraged into it. You needed to turn off the engine and turn it on and turn it off and then get out of the car on the 12th minute because you decided to. Not because someone knocked on your window. He paused. The choice had to be yours, all of it, or none of it would have held. Rachel looked at him for a long moment. You knew all of that, she said. Sitting in your office watching me sit in my car. I had a sense, Daniel said. And the trace of something that was not quite a smile moved across his face. She recognized the phrase. She had used it herself on Jason this morning. She understood for the first time with complete clarity where she had learned it. She walked to the center of the mat. The room gathered the regular class members, the Bridgepoint participants. Brandon setting up the laptop in the corner for Grace's Zoom, Jason near the front with his arms at his sides and his attention entirely in the room. 40-some people who had made the same choice Rachel had made 6 months ago in a parking lot. The choice to come inside. The choice to stay. She looked at them. All of them. Gerald in the back row. Derek near the side wall. Paul beside Corin. Carol with the focus she had built from scratch. Jason at the front teaching in a way that had nothing to do with the crown. She thought about Dana saying, "Good Rachel, good." She thought about Dr. Gwynn saying, "Tell me." She thought about Marcus Webb counting 14 hours. She thought about a piece of paper with a phone number on it, sitting in the front pocket of the canvas bag, in the same pocket where Linda's number had been. She thought about the 11 minutes and the engine going on and off, and the 12-minute decision that had turned into this room. These people, this specific, ordinary, extraordinary, necessary thing. She thought about what Dr. Gwynn had said at the very beginning. Give your body something to do. Something safe. Something that reminds it that you're okay now. And she understood, standing in the center of the mat on the 6-month anniversary of the first Tuesday, that she had not just found something for her body to do. She had not just found safe. She had not just found okay. She had found the thing she was made for. Not the thing she had been trained for, not the thing she had deployed, for not the thing she had nearly broken herself carrying for 11 years. The thing she was made for, the specific convergence of everything she had survived, and everything she had learned, and everything she had lost, and everything she had with enormous difficulty and enormous patience found her way back to. The phone number for Bridgepoint, Portland, buzzed on Brandon's laptop in the corner, and Grace's face appeared on the screen. And beside Grace, partially visible, was a young woman with the particular careful posture of someone who was in her own parking lot right now. Engine running, trying to decide whether to trust the room. Rachel looked at her through the screen. She held her gaze steady. She did not perform certainty. She did not manufacture warmth. She just let the recognition be there in her eyes, the specific, honest signal that she understood what this woman was carrying because she had carried it herself, and she was still here, and the room was real, and the ground was solid, and the choice when she made it would hold. 1 degree. That was how it worked. Always 1 degree. Always one person choosing to turn off the engine and get out of the car and walk through the door into whatever was waiting inside. Always one room built carefully enough that the people who needed it could feel it the moment they stepped in. Jason said her name, quietly across the mat. The class was assembled. The Bridgepoint participants were settled. Brandon had his hand raised slightly in the corner, letting her know Grace's connection was stable. Rachel looked at Jason. He gave her a small nod, not the nod of a student to a teacher, not the nod of deference or permission. The nod of one person to another, in a room they had built together, from something that had been broken, and was now improbably and completely whole. She breathed in. And then Rachel Carter, who had spent 11 years keeping people alive in places she could not name, and 14 months learning that coming home was not an event, but a practice. A daily, deliberate, never quite finished practice of choosing to be present in a world that had the audacity to be worth being present in, looked out at the room full of people who had all in their own way found their way to this mat, and she said the only thing there was to say. "Okay," she said, "let's begin." And they did.